Here is the next part. D-Dad, Mom. As soon as those words left his mouth, everyone turned toward Naruto, shocked. Hades turned to where he heard the voice of his son to see him staring at them with a shocked expression, and he gained a kind smile. "Yes, Naruto, it's us," he said softly. Everyone stared at them all in shocked silence. The questions running through their minds went like this: Hades is Naruto's father? One of the big three? And just who was this woman with him? When Kushina began to walk to Naruto, everyone parted so she could go through unimpeded. When she got to him, she looked at him with a small smile on her face. Naruto stared at his mother, trembling. "Keikawa-san?" Naruto elementally asked in a hoarse whisper. Kushina's smile widened and she nodded. "Yes, Sachi-kun, it's me," she said, happy tears in her eyes at seeing her son for the first time in 4 years. Naruto did something that not only shocked everyone but brought them happy smiles as well. He wrapped Kushina in his arms and started to cry in joy. It's really why you." Naruto cried happily into Kushina's shoulder and held her tight. She just held her son in her arms as happy tears streamed down her face. Hades did nothing but watch as his son let his joy out at finally meeting his birth mother. He heard someone coming up to him from behind and turned to see Chiron there, staring at him curiously. "Yes?" he asked, gaining a frown from the centaur. "So you're Naruto's father?" Chiron asked. Hades nodded, looking back to his son and wife with a small smile. "Yes, I am," he said with no hint of remorse. "I had wondered," was all Chiron said as he and everyone else watched the bittersweet scene before them. "Wondered what?" Hades asked, not looking away from his family. "If you were his father." "And why is that?" Hades said, turning his head to the horseman with a small glare. Chiron flinched at the look but explained, "Because the gods hadn't seen you for years before they sealed the realm of ninja, and when they did there were massive amounts of power floating around the village of Konoha at the time." Hades growled as when he heard the village Naruto was born in. "First, don't ever say that village's name around me, and second, you know what I sealed into Naruto the day he was born, right?" he ordered, then asked. Chiron nodded. Hades sighed. Most of the power around the area that night was Kyuubi's, but... Chiron looked confused as the death god trailed off and looked at the centaur with a serious expression. His eyes widened when the rest of what the god was trying to say clicked into place. "You don't mean you had to?" he trailed as Hades nodded. "Yes, I had to fuse some of my own powers into the seal to make sure she was properly sealed into Naruto," Hades revealed before he turned and walked towards his family. As this had been going on, Naruto had done nothing but cry into his mother's shoulder. He kept muttering, "You're really here?" again and again, and Kushina had just held him tight, whispering, "Yes, Naruto-san is here, let it out, let it all out." Naruto pulled back from his mother to just stare at her, tears still pouring from his eyes. He was about to say something when he heard a small cough just to his left. He turned and saw his father standing there, a small smile on his face. Naruto did nothing other than stare at him, before his head lowered and his shoulders began to shake. Hades, seeing this, approached slowly. "Naruto? Are you Odeshi?" he started to ask but was cut off when something impacted his gut and was sent flying. Hades landed on his back, a few feet away, and clutching his stomach as he struggled to catch his breath, all of this courtesy of a gravity-enhanced punch. He looked up from his position on the ground to see that Naruto had a fist extended to where his stomach had been, and he was looking at him with an expression of pure rage. "And Naruto?" he gasped out in surprise. Kushina could only shake her head sadly. She knew that Naruto could possibly react this way at seeing Hades. The other campers could only stare in utter shock and amazement at what Naruto had dared to do. Slowly, ever so slowly, everyone became aware of the haggard breathing coming from the blonde as he opened his mouth to speak. You son of a bitch," Naruto shouted, further shocking everyone. "Do you know what my life has been like because of you?" He continued to shout, confusing the campers. Naruto, I'm sorry for Dash, Hades tried as he got up, but Naruto would have none of it. Do you know what that godforsaken village did to me? He shouted. Naruto, I really am so Dash, Hades tried again, but by now Naruto was on a roll, tears of anger now falling from his eyes as he continued to reveal just what he had gone through in his life. I was beaten, punched, kicked, stabbed, burned, denied food and a hell of a lot of other things by the time I had turned 3. Damn it 3. And it's all your fault. Now the campers had one thing on their minds, just what did Hades do to him? Inside the mindscape and amulet respectively, Helena and Thalia both thought, Naruto-kun at the same time, one in hurt and sadness because she had played a major part in his pain, and the other in surprised wonder about how he could still be sane after all that. Naruto paused to breath here, and then continued in a much lower tone, you wanted that village to see me as a hero, right? Then tell me, why did they do all that to me? Why did they make my life a living hell? Why would a 3-year-old consider killing himself just to escape it all? He asked, much to the horror of everyone listening, especially when they heard the last admission. Because you sealed her into me. You sealed the monster that attacked them into me the very night I was born. You sealed the Kyuubi into me, you bastard. The campers gasped. They knew of the legendary tailed beasts, but they thought that the creatures were only myths. Hades stared at his son sadly as he fought off the urge to run and hide from those hate-filled and accusing eyes Naruto had directed at him. Yes, Naruto, I did. He admitted with a sad nod. His admission shocked the campers even further. Why? Naruto whispered. He knew why. He had read and reread Hades' letters to him more than once, but he still wanted to hear it from the man himself. He wanted to hear the admission, the regret, the sadness from Hades as he said it. I'll admit I did it. I'll even shout it from the tallest peak on Olympus if I had to, Naruto. I am not the type to force others to do what I cannot do myself. I sealed her into you because I had no other choice. Ask yourself this, could you honestly ask a family to give up their child when you are not willing to do so in return? Naruto shook his head, still glaring at his father, and Hades nodded to him. Exactly, you couldn't. So do you really think that I would do that? He asked, and again Naruto shook his head. No, even if you are a god you wouldn't, he said softly as his anger finally faded away to once again show his sorrow. Hades smiled softly as he saw his son's anger vanish. Naruto, he said softly. The now silenced camp watched as Hades slowly walked up to his son and gently brought him into an embrace. I'm sorry for what I had to do to you, my son. But you have to understand, if I had known what the village would do to you as a result of my actions, I would have never have sealed Helena into you. Even now I wish I hadn't, but I was a fool and thought that people would understand you were only the jailer. Naruto nodded as he brought his arms up and wrapped them around his father. I understand, father, he said quietly. Kushina and everyone watching gained a small smile, happy to see that father and son had made up. However, the moment was interrupted by a very snide voice. Well, isn't this all sweet and happy blah? Makes me sick. Everyone turned to see who had spoken and froze in shock. Ares, god of war, was standing behind the crowd, leaning on his sword. The entire camp was stunned, not one but two gods at camp. They had never had a situation like this before. Hades narrowed his eyes at the man standing before them. Ares, he said. Just what are you doing here? Ares just smirked and shook his head. Oh, you know. I was in the neighborhood and decided to drop by and pay a visit. He said, sarcasm lacing his voice. Hades glared at him. Cut the crap, Ares, and tell me the real reason why you're here. Ares mocked, being offended. What? Can't I drop by to visit the godlings every now and then? He asked with a fake hurt look. Everyone stared at him with blank looks. Seeing those, Ares shook his head. Fine, you guys are no fun. I actually came here to talk to that little runt," he said, pointing to Naruto, who looked surprised. "Why me?" he asked. Ares smirked. "Does the name Hanzo the Salamander mean anything to you?" Naruto, Hades, Kushina, Chiron, and even Dionysus narrowed their eyes at the war god. "And if it does?" Naruto asked in barley-controlled rage at the name. "Nothing, I just figured that you should know that he's still alive," Ares said. Naruto glared at him, anger clearly burning in his eyes. "You're lying. He's dead. I saw him die, I rode atop the one who killed him." Ares quirked a brow at the statement as Avery looked at the blonde. "Is that so?" he asked. "But what if I'm not lying? What if I'm telling the truth and he's still alive, but on the inside he was thinking, 'Come on, take the bait'?" Naruto's look could have frozen even the Sannin with the amount of hatred it had in it, but Ares didn't even look fazed. "If you are lying to me, I'm gonna beat the truth out of you," Naruto exclaimed, shocking even his parents and Dionysus. Ares smirked. "Is that a challenge, punk?" Helena was scared now for the one she had given her heart to and was pleading for him to stop while he was ahead. "Please, Naruto-kun, don't do this. Can't you see he's playing with your anger, trying to goad you into fighting him?" "Naruto, Helena is right. Don't do this. He's riling you into a fight." Thalia added her 2 pennies worth, trying to make him see the truth of the situation. But their pleas went unheard as Naruto was too angry to listen. Naruto's glare became challenging, but it still held a good amount of anger and hate in it. "It is," he said, and all those present could do nothing but stare in shock. The campers had one thing on their minds: he must really have it out for this Hanzo person to challenge a god. And many of them began to whisper amongst themselves. "Please Naruto, don't do this," Kushina called, trying to get Naruto to snap out of it. It didn't work as Naruto was still glaring at the now madly grinning Ares. "Gotcha," Ares thought sinisterly. "Very well, I accept your challenge," he said, making everyone go wide-eyed in terror. A half-blood fighting a god? Naruto didn't stand a chance. "But," Ares said, as Naruto went to unseal his sword, "I choose the time and place since I was the challenged." Naruto, despite the warnings that were going off both around him and inside his head, nodded. "Then choose." Ares' grin became evil as he snapped his fingers and the 2 of them disappeared. When they were gone, there was a stunned silence in the camp, before an orb formed to show both Naruto and Ares and where they were now. Hades and Kushina's eyes widened in shock before their looks quickly turned to that of worry. "This is not good." Olympus. What no one knew was that Ares had been relaying everything from the point he arrived to Olympus. Some of the other gods all had their own reactions to Hades and Poseidon having sons, and about what Ares had played Naruto into doing. Hermes, the god of thieves, travelers, medicine, merchants, and above all else cunning, had a thoughtful look on his face as he calmly went over the situation he had just witnessed. "Damn you Ares," he thought. Okay, maybe he wasn't so calm. "Can't you see that the boy is the one destined to save both the realms?" he thought, as he looked over to 2 others in the room. They caught his gaze and nodded. "I see then." He sighed. "It's time to claim our descendant." Hephaestus, god of technology, blacksmiths, craftsmen, metals, artisans, fire, and volcanoes, rubbed a call-used hand over his chin as he thought over the matter at hand and what it meant for him. "I see, so this is the one that is the key to saving the realms from destruction." He chuckled slightly. "Who would have thought that he would come from my line?" he thought, amused. He caught the gaze of Hermes and nodded. "It is time." Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, brow was twitching madly at her boyfriend's stupid decision. "Damn you Ares. That is my grandson you are messing with. I hope he tears you a new ass for this," she thought, outraged at the man/god, and swore that he would not be getting anything more than a cold look from her for more than a millennia. She felt a gaze on her, turned to see Hermes gazing at both her and her husband, passing a silent message. She nodded, showing she agreed. Finally. I thought I would never get to claim my cute little grandson, she thought, and gained an evil look. Oh, you are in for a big surprise, Ares. Hera and the rest of the gods were staring at Zeus, who was looking both outraged and shocked. Outraged that both Poseidon and Hades had broken their vows, and shocked that Ares would play with a young hero's mind like that just to get him to fight. Poseidon, he said, turning to glare at his older brother. You, Hades, and I will have words, if and when this issue is resolved. But for now we will dash. He was cut off as the throne room doors came flying open and a girl about 9 years of age burst in and began running all over the room, her arms waving wildly behind her. Lord Zeus. We must find him. Send out the scouts, send out the best tracker animals. We have to find Naruto before he gets hurt, she shouted, not stopping for any air the entire time. Hermes, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus smirked at her behavior and had the same thought. Damn Naruto. To get Hestia, one of the eternal maidens, no less worked up about your safety, you must be good at attracting the girls. I'm so proud. Zeus's brow was starting to twitch as the little girl continued to shout and wave her arms frantically while running around the room. Finally he had had enough of it. Hestia, shut up, he shouted, causing the entirety of Olympus to shake and the other gods to cover their ears in pain. But it had its required effect, as the now identified Hestia, goddess of the hearth and agriculture, to stop and stare at the Lord of the Sky in shock. Zeus looked around the stunned room for a moment, before he coughed into his hand. Yes, well, sorry about that, he said, and turned his attention to Hestia. Now try saying that again quietly. Hestia nodded, slightly scared. Why, yes, Lord Zeus. I was saying that we must send out our best trackers and find Naruto before Ares has the chance to hurt him, she said meekly. Zeus shook his head now that he could understand her. I will not do that, Hestia, he said. His answer gained a shocked and hurt look from the god in child form. Why? She asked. They are not needed, he said simply, and pointed to the orb that was now starting to come into focus to show Naruto and Ares now standing in a different place. The shinobi realm. Looking around, Naruto saw that Ares had transported them to a different place and that they were now standing in a huge crater. Why does this place feel familiar? He asked himself, a bit of curiosity shining through his anger as he looked around. Themenscape. Helena looked around through his eyes and gasped upon seeing where they were. Oh no. Thalia turned to her. What? She asked worriedly. What is this place? Helena gulped and said, this is the place Naruto was made to kill Yahiko, she said, causing Thalia to take on a worried and shocked look. Outside. As he continued to look around, Naruto saw that the crater was in the center of a deep ravine, and if he wasn't mistaken he could just barely make out a tall tower in the distance through the thickly falling rain. His eyes widened, now he knew where he was. Tears burned his eyes as images flickered past his mind's eye. Yahiko wrapped him in a hug as he choked out his last message to his son before falling to the ground with a bloody hole in his chest. A large nine-tailed fox charged a giant ball of condensed chakra and yoki and mercilessly unleashing it on the cowering army beneath it. Naruto forced the tears and memories away as he turned an enraged glare at the smirking Ares, who had remained silent up to this point. Do you recognize this place? He asked. Naruto said nothing, but his glare worsening was enough of an answer for the war god, who seemed to think for a moment before he snapped his fingers in mock realization. Oh, that's right, this is the place Hanzo made you kill your father figure. Naruto said nothing, but one could see the rage and sadness running through his eyes as Ares mocked the memory of his adopted father. Just why have you brought us to fight here? Naruto asked. His voice was strained from unvented anger. Ares shrugged. I thought it would be fitting since, he trailed. Fed up with the war god already, Naruto unsealed his sword and stood at the ready. Since what, he would humor the god for just a bit longer, he decided. Ares' smirk vanished, only to be replaced by a furious glare. "Since I plan on finishing what my son started," he exclaimed angrily as smoke began to billow out from beneath his sunglasses. Naruto suddenly felt his rage vanish at the exclamation and just stared at the god, a slightly bewildered look on his face. "Your son?" he asked. Ares, feeling his challenger's anger suddenly disappear, nodded regardless. "What of it, punk?" he asked, drawing his sword. Naruto smirked beneath his mask. Now it was his turn to bite back. "Other than the fact that I can now see where Hanzo got his arrogant attitude from, nothing much." Ares showed no signs of reaction from the comment other than a slight twitch in his jaw. "You know something, brat? I was going to make your death quick and painless, but for that insult I'm going to make it slow, painful and embarrassing." Ares' hand rose from its tightened grip on his sword and snapped his fingers. "Uzugaku or no Sato? Why can't we go and search for Naruto?" the angry voice of Tsunade yelled as she punched a hole in the wall of the Uzukage's office. "Hiru's inside, that's the third wall this month," he thought, depressed. Ever since they had gotten the village on its feet, Tsunade would constantly bug him for a mission to search for her lost godson. It had only gotten worse after they had visited the priestess Shin in the land of demons. "Because Tsunade, and like I've told you 1,000 times already," Minato said, to not bother trying, as Naruto-kun and Konan-san are nowhere near the elemental nations. Sarutobi said with a glare at his female student. Tsunade glared right back at him. "And I've told you, Sarutobi, I don't care what he said. I will not rest until I can hold him in my arms again," she shouted back. She had only been able to hold Naruto once, and that was just after he had been born, right before the Konoha Council had threatened his life. So she was understandably mad. They glared at one another for what seemed like hours, until the door to the office burst open and Shizune came in with a frantic look. "Uzukage-sama! Tsunade-sama!" she exclaimed. "An orb has formed in the village square," she exclaimed anxiously. "It's Naruto." The next thing she knew was that Sarutobi and Tsunade had rushed out of the room, most likely heading for the roof. Shizune sighed in exasperation. Well, at least. She paused and looked around the room as if she were only just realizing she'd been left on her own. "Hey, wait for me," she shouted, rushing out of the room, making for the roof as well. When they got there, they saw that there was indeed an orb over the village square and that Naruto was defiantly one of the people in it, and he did not look happy. The other person in the orb made Tsunade gasp. "That's the land of rain." Naruto narrowed his eyes when nothing happened after Ares snapped his fingers. Was that supposed to do something? Ares' smirk returned a bit. "Trust me, punk, it did something all right. I originally planned on only Olympus and that kept viewing this little fight. But since you decided to go and take a swing at my pride, I think your friends in the elemental nations would just love to see what I'm gonna do to you for that comment." By the time his little rant had ended, Ares' eyes were once again sending out smoke and his sunglasses had even started to melt from the heat that must have been emitted from them. His body was tensed, his face was twisted into an angry scowl, and he was letting off a large amount of killing intent. However, Naruto showed no reaction to the god's anger, other than his eyes showing a bit of irritation as he finally decided to get to the reason they were there. "I thought we were here to fight, not talk," he stated emotionlessly. "If that's all you're going to do, I think you should just put me back at camp, as I have no intention of wasting my time with you when I can be using it to finally get to know my parents." Camp. Everyone gasped when they heard Naruto talk smack at the god, though some of them, Percy mostly, snickered. Hades' face palmed as Kushina smiled slightly. "Of all the why did I have to mention in that training scroll that pissing off an opponent would inevitably help win a fight? That strategy was meant to be used against mortals and monsters only," he muttered, "though if one were to look closer they'd see the small smirk on the god of death's face and the mischievous glint in his eye. Kushina wasn't the only one Naruto got his pranking side from. That's my Sachi-kun, teach him not to mess with an Uzumaki. Kushina thought proudly, but there was a bit of regret in her eyes as she heard the last part of Naruto's comment. I wish you could too, Naru-chan, I want nothing more than to hold in my arms you again. She thought sadly. Land of Rain. If Ares was mad before, then he was furious now. He brought his sword up and leveled it at the blonde's face. You are going to die now, punk. He spat. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he gave the god a smirk beneath his mask. Then bring it, he said, giving the universal sign of, come and get it, with his free hand. The next thing he knew, Ares was in front of him with his sword raised. Naruto's eyes widened as Ares brought the sword down on him and quickly rolled to the left, barely dodging a decapitating strike. Fast, he thought, and Ares appeared in front of him again with his sword coming down. Naruto was able to block it, but he was sent skidding back a few feet as when their swords connected. He's strong too. He thought, surprised by how much strength Ares had in that swing. Ares came in for a swipe at Naruto's lower half. He leapt back and quickly jumped away to give himself more room. I'm too slow with the gravity seals on. I've gotta take them off, he thought. Running away? Ares asked mockingly when he saw this. After all that tough talk, I figured you'd put up a bit more of a fight. Naruto didn't answer him as he raised a hand into half-ram sign, gravity seals, full release. There was a glow from the center of his back and he immediately felt light as a feather, but his time to enjoy the sensation was cut short when Ares appeared in front of him, sword raised for another debilitating blow. Naruto was able to block in time and get him into a sword lock. He was able to hold strong, but he could tell that his arms didn't have enough strength to hold against that of the god's own. Ares smirked when he saw Naruto's arms begin to tremble. I'll admit this kid is fast and has good reflexes, but he's not good enough, he thought. He began to put more pressure on his sword. Naruto grit his teeth as he focused on keeping Ares' sword away from him. I didn't want to use it so early, but... Naruto-kun. Use my chakra before you resort to that. Helena shouted, interrupting his thoughts, already pumping said chakra into his system. Feeling the chakra running through him, Naruto was internally thanking her, before his eyes narrowed and he grunted when he began to push Ares' sword back. Ares' eyes narrowed when he saw Naruto's eyes turn a blood red, and he felt his sword begin to be pushed away. No mortal, half-blood, or not, should be able to match this level of strength. Is it the dark power I feel running through him? He thought as he began to apply more pressure to his sword, trying to end this now. Naruto grunted again when he felt more pressure on the sword lock and he began to unconsciously take chakra from Helena until wisps of it began to surround him. He became more feral looking, and he threw Ares off him, panting when he did so. Ares landed on his feet and glared at Naruto. That is until he felt the young half-blood's power output and could literally see wisps of it coming of him. How can he be so powerful? And what the hell is that power? It like chakra, but it's much darker. He thought, eyes narrowing in anger. Camp. Suhot, were the shouts of a lot of girls, mostly from the Aphrodite cabin, when they saw how Naruto looked with Helena's power coming off of him. Kushina's sweat dropped. Is this really what most of Mother's children are like? She thought. Land of Rain. Ares sheathed his sword and began going through hand signs faster than Naruto could keep track, and when he finished, he shouted, Fire Style, 1000 Burning Limbs Jutsu. A mass of golden limb-shaped flames came roaring out of the god's mouth towards the still form of Naruto. Just as they engulfed him, he smirked and began channeling his chakra. Camp. Get out of the way, Naruto. Kushina shouted. Hades, Chiron, and even Dionysus began to get worried. They had seen the hundreds of victims of that jutsu over the years, and they could honestly say Naruto had no chance against it if it hit him. Olympus. Is Ares crazy? Several of the gods shouted at once. Hestia looked like she was about to faint. Get out of the way, Naruto, she shouted. Zeus looked at the viewing orb with narrow eyes. He had saw the smirk. What are you planning, young one? Hermes, Hephaestus, and Aphrodite glared at the orb, before they again caught each other's gaze and nodded. Hermes snapped his fingers as he sent his claiming sign to Naruto. Land of Rain. Ares smirked evilly as the flames engulfed the son of Hades. He was about to turn and leave when he noticed something about the flames. Instead of plowing over and burning Naruto to a crisp like they were supposed to, they had begun to rotate around him. Wind style, rotating dome, was the shout that came out of the flames. They died to show Naruto pivoting on the balls of his feet, his arms outstretched and surrounded in a dome of pure wind. He slowed to a stop and smirked at Ares as the wind around him died down, almost like he was asking if that was all he had. Ares growled as Naruto was able to deflect his technique, and he began going through more hand signs. Fire style, Phoenix incineration, he shouted, letting loose a flaming phoenix head from his mouth. Naruto again smirked. Another fire jutsu, he thought as he started his own string of seals. Doesn't this guy know we're surrounded by its weakness? As his hands settled into final seal, that of the bird, Naruto called out the name to his technique, water style, water dragon jutsu. A huge dragon was formed out of the falling rain and flew at blinding speeds towards the phoenix, which was looking mighty small at the moment. The flaming head was put out with a massive hissing sound and steam covered the field. How the hell does he keep getting out of my attacks? Ares thought before he began to see something glowing through the steam. As the mist cleared, it showed Naruto standing there with a golden caduceus hovering over his head. Ares' eyes widened when he saw this. This punk is not only Hades' son but the descendant of Hermes too, he thought, before his eyes narrowed in anger. I don't care whose kid/descendant he is. I will end him. Naruto was too focused on Ares to notice the symbol of the messenger god. Camp. Heh, everyone shouted, seeing the caduceus above Naruto's head, the Hermes cabin especially. Upon hearing a sheepish giggle, the entire camp turned to Kushina, who was rubbing the back of her head. Did I forget to mention that Hermes is my great-grandfather? At hearing her admission, the campers, and even Hades, face faulted. Olympus. The other gods were staring at Hermes like he had gone and grown another head. What? He asked, and like their children at camp, the gods face faulted. Land of Rain. As the symbol faded, Ares growled in anger as he flipped through more hand signs. Fire style, giant fireball, he shouted, sending an absolutely huge fireball out of his mouth, shocking Naruto to his place. Come on Naruto-kun, move. Helena shouted. Damn it Naruto, get out of the way. Thalia shouted. Both were trying to get him into gear, but Naruto was too shocked by the size of the fireball to do anything. Ares smirked when he saw Naruto not moving, and the fireball getting ever closer, thought, I gotcha this time, punk. Olympus. No. Hestia shouted, covering her eyes as the fireball converged on him. The other gods had wide eyes seeing this, and Hephaestus quickly snapped his fingers to send his claim. Land of Rain. As Naruto was consumed, Ares grinned evilly again. But that fell when the flames dispersed and he saw Naruto standing there unharmed, surprised as hell, and a flaming hammer above his head. Come on. The one time I get the surprised upper hand and he turns out to be Hephaestus's descendant too. Ares thought angrily, but in his mind a chibi version of himself was crying anime tears and saying, what is it, let's all pick on Ares Day. Camp. Now everyone was staring blankly at the orb, and they turned to a sheepishly grinning Kushina. What? Is it a crime to be related to more than one god? She asked, but inside she was thinking, thank you for saving my son, Hephaestus Sofu. Olympus. You are very welcome, Mago. I'm just glad I made it in time. Hephaestus thought, hearing his granddaughter's thanks. He turned to the other gods who were now staring at him in surprise, and like Hermes he asked, what? Last I checked it wasn't illegal to have a child with a half-blood, he said and turned back to view the fight. Could you have cut it any closer? Hermes and Aphrodite asked rhetorically in their minds. Back with the fight. Naruto, oblivious to the thoughts of everyone watching, was looking down at himself confused. What? How am I immune to the fire? He asked himself, his confusion etched on his face. I don't know, but your body is approaching the limit of chakra I can safely give you, so you had better end this quick, Helena said. Naruto nodded. He could already feel the negative effects that her chakra was having on him, signified by his hands shaking, and his breathing was becoming heavier with every movement he made. One thing was for sure, he wouldn't last much longer like this. Cut the chakra, Lina-chan. It's time I ended this, he thought to her, eyes narrowing at Ares. Helena nodded, cutting the flow of her chakra. Just be careful, Naruto-kun. We both know you haven't fully mastered the new level yet, she said. Naruto nodded, slowly closing his eyes. I know, Lina-chan. Ares, seeing Naruto close his eyes, smirked to himself. Looks like the punk's given up, he thought as Naruto's appearance turned back to normal. Ares drew his sword and rushed at the blonde. Camp. No, don't just give up, Percy shouted, seeing his friend seemingly accepting defeat. This was reflected by many of the other campers. Hades and Kushina looked thoughtful, seeing their son do this. A thought struck the both of them at the same time, and Kushina turned to Hades with wide eyes. You don't think that he's going to use it, do you? She asked. Hades nodded, not taking his eyes off the orb. If he's going to, then he had better use it quick. Kushina nodded to him and turned back to view what would happen, inwardly thinking, I hope you know what you're doing, Naru-chan. Just please make it out of this alive. Olympus. And no, Hestia whispered, closing her eyes to block what was about to happen. The other gods had narrow eyes. What are you doing, Naruto? They all thought. They knew he wasn't out of tricks, but they didn't know what he was closing his eyes for. Hermes and Hephaestus looked over to Aphrodite. She nodded and snapped her fingers. The fight. As Ares got closer, he saw that Naruto hadn't done anything yet, and he smirked. This is it, he thought. He brought his sword up once he was in range and prepared to bring it down on Naruto's head. But just before it connected, Naruto's eyes snapped open and his arm shot out towards Ares, and he called a jutsu that had most of those watching gapping. Shinra Tensei, he shouted, sending Ares flying into the side of the crater and causing him to leave an Ares-shaped hole in it. Olympus. What? All but three gods shouted. They all had wide eyes when they heard Naruto shout out his jutsu's name, and they couldn't believe it. That was a jutsu that only a Rinnegan wielder could use. Uzu. The ones watching in the Whirlpool Village, all had shocked looks and wide eyes. Tsunade and Jiraiya were the most shocked. The last time any of them had ever seen or heard of that jutsu was when Jiraiya was training the AIM orphans. And no, it's not possible, Tsunade stuttered out. Jiraiya was too stunned to say anything. Hiruzen raised a confused brow. What's not possible, Tsunade? He asked. That jutsu, Jiraiya finally spoke, getting his sensei's attention. Someone can only use it when a special condition is met, he said, not taking his eyes off the orb. Condition? Sarutobi asked. Jiraiya nodded. A condition that I've only seen to have been met by one person, he said, causing Hiruzen to nod for him to continue. Jiraiya's eyes never left the orb as he delivered the clincher. Only someone with the legendary Rinnegan can use it in its partner jutsu, Bansho Tenin, he said. Now Hiruzen understood why they were so shocked, and he and Shizun were just as surprised. The fight. It can't be. That jutsu is only usable with the Rinnegan, Ares shouted in his mind as he began to shakily pull himself out of the hole. If this kid has it, then I'm doomed. When Ares emerged from the hole in the wall, Naruto could see that he had a shocked look, and if he wasn't mistaken, there was a hint of fear in it as well. Ares took one look at Naruto's eyes and he immediately paled and thought, oh shit. Because Naruto's eyes weren't his usual azure blue. Instead they had changed to a dark royal blue and had 3 rings around the pupil which had shrunk to the size that it was nothing more than a dot. Naruto smirked at him. Scared Ares, he asked, sounding a little more confident than he felt. I won't be able to last much longer. That last jutsu took over half my remaining chakra. He thought. Ares was about to retort when something began to happen to Naruto. His form began to glow with a soft golden light, and his clothes began to change. Gone were the torn orange shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. Now they were replaced by a pure black cloak that went down to his ankles, black skin-tight jeans and combat boots. His chest was bare, leaving his toned abs for the world to see. The spiral seal that held Helena was in full display. And finally his mask was gone, finally revealing his now baby fatless face and his whisker birthmarks. Ares gulped as he defiantly knew who had sent that sign. Not good, he thought. Naruto looked down at his form to see his new outfit. Not bad, but I could use a shirt. As he thought this, he could hear Helena giggling perversely as she caught sight of his bare chest. He could swear that if he were to look inside the seal he would see her drooling, and he thought he heard Thalia let out a perverted giggle as well. Olympus. Aphrodite smirked when she saw the others looking to her. What? He happens to be the son of my daughter, Kushina, she said, and turned back to the orb, but with a twitching brow. Though I get the feeling that he has just insulted the outfit I sent him. She pouted. Ungrateful brat. Hestia couldn't say a word because she was too busy blushing at Naruto's face and body to bother with listening to anybody. Camp. Are those? Percy began, but was interrupted by a shout of, Whiskers, from half of the females in the camp. The other half had just fainted from blood loss. Hades, seeing this, sighed and turned to Kushina. You wanted to know why I left him that mask? He asked, getting a nod from his wife. He pointed to the conscious half of the female campers, who now had looks of what a predator would send its prey directed at Naruto. That's why. Kushina groaned after a moment of thought when she realized what her mother had just done. Really, Kaa-san? Did you have to take his mask? He already has enough problems with fangirls. Land of Rain. I had better not get any more fangirls because of this. Naruto thought with a shiver. He could practically feel the predatory gazes the female campers were sending him. He looked up at Ares and smirked. You know, if you want to give up, all you have to do is say so, he said. Ares' look turned from shocked and slightly scared to murderous, and his sunglasses began to melt. The god of war never gives up, he shouted. Just for that I'm going to pay that slut you call a mother a visit. The god smirked when he saw Naruto begin to tremble. Maybe I'll show her what it's like to be with a god. Mindscape. Oh, Helena said, once she heard this. Thalia looked to her worried. Oh? What's that supposed to mean? She asked. Helena shook her head. One thing you never do around Naruto is insult Konan, she said. Because once you do, you are as close to death as you can ever be without dying. Thalia's eyes widened as the implications of what Ares just said and Naruto's imminent reaction became clear to her. Oh, indeed, was all she said, as they both turned back to watch the fight. The fight. Ares was about to continue insulting Konan when he felt an unreal amount of ki flood the area. He looked to Naruto to see that his hair was now shadowing his eyes, said eyes glowing from the shadow of his hair. Ares gulped such intent and bloodlust. Just what the hell is this boy, he thought. Naruto looked up and Ares saw that his eyes held nothing but the hatred and the desire to rip him to shreds. The next thing Ares knew was that Naruto was in front of him with his sword drawn, going for his head. He tried to jump back, but he was blocked by a clone who had a raise-non aimed for the base of his spine. His eyes widened when he saw this, and leaped over both attacks. Naruto's sword took out the clone before he could react. Ares smirked, but turned, and in a burst of speed was heading for the village in the distance. "No you don't!" Naruto shouted, and began to chase after him. Ares was able to maintain a good distance from him. "I need more speed," Naruto thought. He got an idea. "Well, I've already revealed the Rinnegan, why not use them?" he thought. He took out a sealing scroll, unrolled it, bit his thumb and wiped the blood on the holding seal. There were several poofs of smoke, and when it cleared there were 6 people running beside him. While 4 of them looked to be exactly like him, the last 2 looked to be different people, and had multiple metal rods pierced through their faces. The first had jaw-length red hair, a slightly round face, and deathly pale skin, and was taller than the rest. This was the body of Nagato. The second was revealed to be Yahiko Harakan. And blazing in their eyes was the Rinnegan. Naruto looked over to the body of his uncle. "Do it," he ordered. The body nodded, and all 7 of them jumped high in the air while he began going through hand signs at a fast pace. When they were finished, he clapped his hands together and exclaimed in a dead tone, "Summoning jutsu." There was a huge blast of smoke, and out of it came a giant eagle. With the 7 of them riding on its back, they followed Ares into the rain village. "Olympus!" "What?" Zeus shouted, drawing worried looks from the others. "How does that half-blood have the Eagle clan?" The others shook their heads. Zeus could be rather picky with who has the contract of his animal symbol. Zeus sat back, mumbling, "If Hades has anything to do with this, then he'll wish I never gotten him out of Cronus' stomach." Camp. As they watched the last few events, Hades had the urge to go back to the underworld and lock himself in his palace. He gulped. "Why do I have a feeling that by giving Naruto the Eagle contract I have just made Zeus very angry?" Kushina heard his gulp and turned her head, ignoring the now whispering campers. "You okay, Hades-kun?" she asked elementally. He nodded nervously, "As much as I can be when I get the feeling that I just royally pissed Zeus off." Kushina sighed and nodded to him. "I told you that giving Naruto that contract wasn't a good idea." Hades nodded. "Yeah, I can see why now." Fight. With the eagle summons now providing the speed needed, catching up to Ares was short work. As his form came closer, Naruto looked to his Azura path. It nodded and raised its hands. The hands transformed from the wrists up into a pair of small missiles, which were launched at Ares retreating back. They impacted the ground at the god's heels, sending him flying into a nearby building. Ares pulled himself out of the hole he found himself in and turned to glare at the blonde, only to stop and gap at him once he saw that he had help. He can use the path's ability too, he thought, beginning to doubt his chances of winning the fight. Hell, he'd be lucky if he made it out unharmed at all. He began to run again. Naruto, seeing this, looked to the body of his adopted father. He nodded and the body raised one of its arms and began to manipulate the gravity around the god. Ares' retreating form was lifted up and brought back to Naruto. When the Deva path swung its hand down, he was slammed into the roof of a building, and Naruto and his paths jumped down from the eagle summons, which dispelled itself now that its job was done. As they fell, the paths and Naruto each created a chakra rod. They raised the rods above their heads as they closed in on the downed form of the war god. Ares could do nothing but watch as they descended on him with the rods raised high. The 7 of them thrust the rods in their hands down into the back of the god as they reached the building's top. Ares screamed in pain as the rods ripped into his back and hands, pinning him to the ground. Camp. There was complete silence as everyone saw that Ares had been pinned. Did I see that right? Did Naruto really beat Ares? A camper asked, rubbing his eyes. His neighbor was doing the same and nodded. I think he did. Chiron could only stare at the scene shown by the orb. He's that powerful? And he hasn't even had hero training. Dionysus, like the centaur, was staring at the orb, but instead of shock it was a stare of contemplation, and he had a smirk on his face. I knew I liked this boy. Anyone able to put Ares in his place is okay in my book, he thought. Hades and Kushina, while surprised that Naruto had been able to defeat Ares, had proud smiles on their faces. You did it, Sachi-kun. Kushina thought happily. That's my boy. You've made me proud, Naruto. Hades thought proudly. The entirety of the Ares cabin meanwhile was glaring with eyes full of hate at Naruto. Olympus. There was stunned silence as the gods saw what Naruto had done to Ares. How? Hera asked, shocked that her son had been defeated. Many of the gods had the same reaction as her. Zeus, though, was just staring at the scene with a blank look. His thoughts couldn't be described at the moment. Hestia was staring at the viewing orb with a stunned look, before her face broke into a happy smile, and she began shouting, I knew you could do it, Naruto. Hermes, Hephaestus, and Aphrodite all had proud smirks on their faces. You have proven yourself to the others now, my Mago. The Rain Village. Naruto glared at the god pinned down by the 7 chakra rods. The golden blood of the gods was gushing out of his wounds. Ares was staring at Naruto with a scared and disbelieving look. PP, please have mercy, he begged. Naruto continued to glare down at him. We are not done yet, Ares, he said as he brought his hands together, palms facing less than an inch apart, and began focusing what was left of his chakra. A small black sphere of pure chakra formed between his palms. Naruto looked up from his palms to his paths and sent them the mental command. They nodded, and two grabbed Ares and ripped him out of his pinned state, causing further pain and humiliation to the defeated god, and tossed him into the air as Naruto let the black sphere float from his hands, high into the air. The two collided, and Naruto once again brought his hands together. Chibaku Tensei. When he shouted the name of the jutsu, rocks had started to fly and gather around Ares. The rocks combined into a huge round ball. Naruto screamed in exertion as he forced his body to give up what little chakra it had left. When the ball of earth was formed, it resembled a miniature moon. The only visible sign of Ares was his head sticking out the side of the huge construction. Naruto was left a panting mess. His hands were braced against his knees to stop him from collapsing, his chakra reserves almost completely empty. Lina-chan, give me enough chakra to use this last jutsu, he thought to the vixen in his gut. Alright, but this will hurt a bit, Naruto-kun. Your body still isn't ready to use more of my chakra than you already have, Helena said, but giving him what he asked for regardless. Naruto nodded to her and felt her chakra once again flood his system, boosting his dwindling reserves. That was followed by a huge amount of pain coursing through his body, but he pushed it aside for now and stood up, glaring at the ball of earth restraining the god. We are still not done, Ares. During the battle you called Konan Kaasan a slut and threatened to rape her. You will be the first victim of my newest jutsu to pay for what you have threatened to do. Naruto shouted to him, scaring the god further. I have created a lightning jutsu so powerful that it can rival and possibly surpass Zeus' Master Bolt. Naruto shouted from the top of the building, both his blue and Helena's red chakra beginning to surround him in a swirling storm. Thunder was beginning to rumble. Uzu. Every shinobi in the village was in shock due what Naruto had said. They had all heard of the legendary Zeus and his Master Bolt. A jutsu so strong that it could blow the tops off mountains and destroy entire villages with little effort. One Jonin was especially shocked at what his little brother claimed to have accomplished. Did he really create a jutsu that powerful? To rival the mythical Master Bolt? Kakashi asked, pulling his headband up so his Sharingan could study and possibly copy it. Olympus. Every last one of the gods were stunned to silence at this proclamation. They felt a burst of ki coming from Zeus and they all looked to him worried to see that he was glaring furiously at Naruto through the orb. How dare that boy mock me? Let me see this so-called jutsu. He spat. The other gods looked back at the orb to view this jutsu. To be honest, they were all a little scared of it, especially if it was as powerful as Naruto claimed. Camp. No one said a thing as they stared at the orb in shock at what Naruto had just stated. Something more powerful than the Master Bolt of Zeus? If it was possible, then they knew they should never mess with the blonde. Hades, Kushina, Chiron, and Dionysus were staring in shock and a bit of interest to see this jutsu. The fight. As his chakra began to climb to levels never before seen, Naruto's fist became covered in a ball of crackling lightning. Raising his fist into the air, a giant dragon head came from the clouds. Naruto glared at the now terrified and struggling god. Now vanish with the roar of thunder, and let this herald the beginning of the one known as pain. Naruto shouted. He thrust his lightning-covered hand towards Ares and called out the name of his jutsu, Kirin. The dragon head let out a roar and flew at blinding speeds at Ares. All Ares could do was stare in fear. His mouth was open in a silent scream as the lightning dragon slammed into him. There was a deafening boom and a blinding flash of light. Rocks from the miniature moon went flying everywhere. When the light died down, there was nothing left of the giant ball of earth, and Ares was nowhere to be seen. The clouds cleared, allowing the sun to shine where the rain had forever fallen on the rain village. Naruto could be seen panting heavily on the edge of the rooftop, almost unconscious from an extreme case of chakra exhaustion. He smirked and began to fall forward. Now Ares. You shall forever know pain. He whispered, plunging from the building's top, unable to hold himself up any longer. The last thing he saw and heard before he lost consciousness was the fast approaching ground and Helena's and Thalia's concerned shouts of Naruto-kun. Just as he was about to impact it, he vanished along with the orbs that were being used to view his fight. Uzu. Everyone in the village could do nothing but continue to stare in amazement at what the blonde Jinchuriki had done to the man he was fighting. He actually did it. Kakashi stuttered, eyes wide in amazement. His Sharingan had seen every inch of damage it had done. His assessment. It was just as, if not more, powerful than Naruto had promised. Olympus. The gods sat there in amazement, unable to do or say anything. All they could do was stare at where Naruto had been at even after the orb had vanished. Zeus himself was in total and utter shock. That jutsu. It was even more powerful than the Master Bolt. Camp. No one could say a word. All they could do was stare at where the orb had once been. They heard a snapping of a pair of fingers and a small pop. They turned to see that Hades now held the battered and unconscious form of Naruto. Hades and Kushina did nothing but stare at their son in pride. They each had smiles reflecting how proud they were. Hades looked up to see that everyone was just staring at them. He raised a brow. What? Naruto opened his eyes to see that he was in a very familiar black void. He groaned, not this place again. Yes, Naruto, you are here again. The voice of the girl rang in his head as she began to take shape. Naruto sighed and nodded. Very well, what's it about this time? He asked. The girl giggled. I came to tell you something from your father, she said. A brow rose on Naruto's face in interest. And what would that be? And why can't he tell me himself when I wake up? He asked. She giggled again. He said to tell you that you have made him very proud, she said. And he can't tell you in person because when you awake, he and Lady Kushina will have gone back to the underworld. Naruto's face became downcast. He had just met his birth parents, and already they had to leave him. It was then he remembered what the girl had said before. He had made his father proud of him. It brought a small smile to his face and a sense of peace to his heart. something he had not felt since Konan and Yahiko had taken him in. He was brought out of his thoughts when the girl cleared her throat. He grinned sheepishly and motioned for her to continue. She rolled her eyes with a small smile and continued as asked. Lord Hades and Lady Kushina have also asked that I give you these, she said, producing 2 scrolls from the inside of her kimono. Naruto took them and saw that the first had the symbol of Hades stamped on the side, and the second had the symbol of the Uzumaki clan on it. His eyes widened when he saw this and he looked up to her asking a silent question. She nodded and giggled again. Yes, the one with the Uzumaki swirl is the rest of your inheritance from your mother, and the other one, well, I can't really say as I don't know what's in it, she explained somewhat sheepishly at the end. Naruto's sweat dropped at the last part. And they will appear beside you when you awaken, she explained, getting a nod from the blonde half-blood. The void suddenly began to lighten around them. The girl sighed as she began to disappear. Well, this is goodbye for now, Naruto. Naruto nodded before a thought hit him. Wait, can't I at least get your name, he asked. The girl giggled at him, her form nodded as she continued to disappear. It's Maisumi, she said, and both she and Naruto vanished from the void. Outside the void. Naruto groaned as his eyes opened. When his eyes had adjusted to the light, he saw that he was lying in the medical room of the big house. He groaned again as he sat up and rubbed his head, and immediately regretted doing so. Oh, he groaned yet again, dragging the word throughout the duration of the pain that had surged through his body. You were right, Naruto-kun? Helena asked, concern lacing her voice. Groaning again, Naruto leaned against the headboard, closing his eyes to try to ignore out the pain. Yeah, he thought to her, just sore. I would expect that you would be, Helena said, after all you did fight the war god. Naruto groaned again, don't remind me. He thought, I knew he would be strong, but I just barely managed to beat him. If it wasn't for you or the Rinnegan, I probably wouldn't be here right now. He felt Helena nodding in agreement. Yes, that's true, she said. But don't you ever go doing something so stupid again. You hear me? She asked, beginning to yell, letting her anger, which she had suppressed due to her worry, out as she began to tear into him. What were you thinking? You could have died. If it had been anybody else, they would have died from a mixture of chakra exhaustion and poisoning. She paused for breath, and someone who had been quiet took the chance to add her 2 cents. Helena is right, Naruto. Thalia began, her voice holding the same anger Helena's did. What would have happened had you not had Helena there to help you, she asked, and Naruto tried to say something but she cut him off. You would have been killed during the fight, she yelled. Did you not stop to think about the consequences? What would have happened to Helena, to your mother, to me? She asked, getting really quiet at the end. Naruto's eyes widened when he heard the question. And he began to realize just what would have happened had he lost. His mother would have been devastated. Add his death to the fact that she still wasn't fully over Yahiko's own, then she probably would have gone into a depression so deep she wouldn't have been able to recover. Helena? That was a little easier to figure out, and it did nothing to brighten his mood. If anything, it worsened it. Because due to the seal that bound her, the second his heart would stop is when hers would as well. And he doubted if his father had the ability to give both their lives back. And Thalia? He was confused as to why she would have put herself into the equation. Yes, they had gotten close the last few days that she had lived in the amulet, but she couldn't possibly have those kinds of feelings for him, could she? But before Naruto could ask what was on his mind, the door to the medic room opened to reveal Chiron, Percy, and Grover. Their eyes, which had been worried, changed to that of relief when they saw that he was awake, and they all let out a sigh of relief. Thank the gods, Chiron said. I thought that you wouldn't be awake for another few days. Naruto sighed and made a mental note to continue the conversation at a later date and turned his attention to his visitors. He grinned sheepishly at them and rubbed the back of his head. "Yeah, well, you know me, I'm a fast healer," he said, doing his best to ignore the pain that had coursed through his body when had moved his arm and failing miserably. "You okay?" Grover asked when they saw his pained expression. "Yeah. Just remind me to never do that again," Naruto said, trying to smile jokingly but again failing due to pain shooting through his body. He groaned again. "This is why I hate chakra exhaustion," he muttered quietly. "It hurts like hell." He heard a few snorts coming from Percy and Grover and looked at them with an annoyed expression. "Haha, laugh at the injured one, will you?" he asked. They said nothing, but they still and their amused expressions. Seeing this, Naruto's own became a mix of sinister and mischievousness. "Let's see you laughing when I shear your fur off, or I make training all the more hellish." Once the other two teens heard him, they both paled and backed away. Chiron shook his head, grinning. Heroes never ceased to amuse him with the way they could act at times. He was about to speak when he spotted the scrolls that had suddenly appeared on Naruto's bedside table. "Naruto?" he asked, drawing Naruto's attention away from his scheming, and getting a raised brow from the blonde half-blood. Chiron pointed to the scrolls. "Would you mind explaining what those are doing here, when they clearly weren't when your parents put you here to rest?" he asked. "They're the rest of my inheritance," he said simply. His statement drew some questioning looks from the others. He sighed and began to explain. "When I passed out, I was visited by a messenger of my father," he said, gaining wide eyes from the three listeners. He continued before they could speak. "I was actually just about to read them when you walked in," he lied, reaching for the one with the swirl. But leaning that far over in the bed in his condition proved to be too much for his body and he began to fall over. Chiron steadied him. "Here, don't strain yourself," he said, handing the one Naruto wanted over to him. He nodded his thanks as Chiron stepped back to allow him to read. He sighed again as he bit his thumb, wiped the accumulated blood on the seal and unrolled the scroll. "Sachi-kun. First of all, what the fuck were you thinking? You almost died of chakra exhaustion fighting Ares. Do you realize?" "Okay, skipping the part where mom chews my ass for fighting Ares," Naruto said. His sweat dropped when he heard snickering coming from not only his friends but from the seal and amulet. "Okay, now that I've gotten my point across, I have something very important to tell you. I wasn't completely honest with you when you read my first letter. I was able to unlock a portion of the Rinnegan's abilities without fully achieving the actual bloodline. The ability was the chakra chains I was capable of producing from my chakra. They're a lot like those chakra rods you use, and are based on the same principle. But instead of being used to pierce through your opponent, they are used to bind and hold them down. It was along with my special chakra that I was able to control Helena's chakra as well as I had. I was able to send my chakra into the chains and force it into a tailed beast until someone was able to seal it. I'm sorry for not telling you about this sooner, but I had to be sure you were ready before you started training with the techniques that weren't mentioned, and after your fight with Ares I believe that you are ready now. One of those techniques become available when you reach the 5th level. You can bring back the dead." Yes, I know that the Rinnegan already had that power, but this one is different. It is the same power, but it is boosted by at least 100 times. And like you've probably guessed, you can bring back a person from the dead, no matter how long they have been gone from the living world. Stood out the most, I can bring back Yahiko Ryu-san and Nagato Aji-san, he thought. The rest of the abilities you don't know about are in another scroll inside the seal at the bottom of the page. Love, your loving Kaa-san, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. When he finished reading, Naruto looked up to see that his friends had left him and the only one left in the room with him was Chiron. He sent him a look asking for the other scroll. Chiron nodded and handed it to him, and once Naruto had bitten his thumb and wiped the blood on the seal, he read what his father had to say to him. "Naruto. First of all, Congratulations for your victory over Ares. You have made me extremely proud, my son. Second, is that I must agree with your mother, not out of fear that she might kill me if I don't, but because as your father I am naturally concerned for your health. But there is an important matter that I must tell you. My helm has gone missing. Now I have not told anyone else of this, which is why I am giving you the quest of retrieving it and bringing it to me in the underworld. I have an idea about who may have taken it, but I'm not entirely certain that it was who I suspect, because gods cannot personally take each other's symbols of power, so he must have had a half-blood take it for him. The one I suspect to have stolen it is Ares. I have my reasons to suspect him. This would not be the first time he would have tried to steal something of mine. It has been missing since the winter solstice and by proxy the meeting of the gods. The campers were there on a field trip, so it is quite possible that Ares convinced one of the half-bloods to do the deed. There is however another theft that occurred during that time. Zeus's master bolt has been stolen as well. I suspect that Ares has stolen it as well, but I cannot be sure as he has never tried to obtain the master bolt thus far. But if you should choose to accept the quest I have given you, I must warn against taking to the skies. With Poseidon claiming Percy and you being claimed by me, Zeus has begun to suspect that both of you are the culprits, and has started to blame both of us for the theft. How he gets the idea I have no clue. But knowing my baby brother, he's probably got it in his head that we were working together in it. I have been doing my best to dissuade him of the idea, but it's no use. However, I have a feeling that with the recent hellhound attack on Percy that Chiron might send him on a guest of his own. It would be a good idea for you both to team up and retrieve both my helm and the master bolt, by the summer solstice deadline. Because it is by that time that Zeus has demanded his bolt back. His alternative? All-out war with Poseidon and I. Naruto, this war must not happen. You must do whatever it takes to get that bolt back to him. I would appreciate it if you got my helm back by the same date too, but it doesn't matter if you do, just as long as you and Percy get the master bolt back to Zeus. I'm not meaning to put pressure on you, but please, I cannot afford to allow my kingdom to expand any faster than it already is. And by letting this war happen, the expansion rate will be out of my control. I already have problems with it as it is, not to mention the amount of paperwork I have to do. Please just make sure the war does not happen. Sincerely, your father Hades. Or if you prefer, Minato Namikaze. By the time Naruto had stopped reading, his eyes had gone so wide that they could have been rolling around on the floor. The letter was held so tightly in his shaking hands that it could have torn. Chiron, seeing this, gained a concerned look. Something wrong? He asked. Naruto said and did nothing other than handing the scroll to the centaur and motioning for him to read. Chiron did as asked with a confused look. That changed however when he began to read, and by the time he had finished he had the same expression as Naruto. They took one look at each other and spoke as one. This is not good. The next day, Percy jolted awake, covered in a cold sweat. Another nightmare. He thought, looking down at his shaking hands. They've gotten worse since the claiming. He looked out the window of cabin 3 to see that a storm was brewing, and thunder was rolling across the valley. Well, at least I know I didn't dream up the storm, he thought. He heard a clopping at the door, like a hoof knocking on the threshold. Come in. Grover trotted in, looking worried. Mr. D wants to see you and Naruto. Why? He wants I better let him tell you. But come on, Naruto is waiting for us. Nervously, Percy got dressed and followed. He was sure that he and Naruto were in huge trouble. The last few days since the claiming, he had been half expecting a summons to the big house. And now that Naruto was awake, and that it had been revealed that both of them were children of two of the big three gods, the ones who weren't supposed to have any kids, he figured that it was a crime just for them to be alive. Not like he had been all that surprised to know that he was Poseidon's son. Naruto had told him of the possibility. It was who Naruto's father had turned out to be that had surprised him. Hades? The god of death? How the hell does someone miss that fact? He snapped out of his thoughts when a clap of thunder sounded, and he asked Grover if they would need an umbrella. The satyr shook his head. No, he said. It never rains here unless we want it to. Percy pointed to the storm, looking skeptical. Then what the hell is that? Grover glanced uneasily at the sky. It'll pass over us. Bad weather usually does. Percy shook his head, realizing that Grover was right. The week and a half that he and Naruto had been there, it had never even been overcast. The few rain clouds they had seen had skirted right around the valley. But this one was huge. As they walked, they saw everyone was going about their normal business, but they all looked tense. They were keeping their eyes on the storm. When they reached the porch to the big house, they saw Dionysus, Chiron playing pinochle, and Naruto leaning against the railing. Obviously they were waiting for them. Well, Dionysus said without looking up, our second celebrity. Percy waited. Come closer, Mr. D said. And don't expect me to kowtow to you, mortal, just because your father is old Barnaclebeard. A large amount of lightning danced across the sky and thunder shook the windows of the house. Blah, blah, blah. He said, ignoring the event. Chiron feigned interest in his cards. Grover cowered by the railing, his hooves were clopping back and forth. And Naruto just stared blankly at the wine god. If I had my way, he began, I would cause your molecules to erupt in flames. We'd sweep up the ashes and be done with a lot of trouble. But Chiron and your friend there, he pointed to Naruto, seem to feel this would be against my mission at this cursed camp, to keep you little shits safe. Mr. D said. Naruto shook his head. Sorry, but spontaneous combustion is a form of harm, Mr. D, he said. And I would rather not suddenly burst into flames, he said, I smiling amusedly. Nonsense, Dionysus said. Neither of you would feel a thing. Nevertheless, I've agreed to restrain myself. I'm thinking of turning seaweed over there into a dolphin instead, and you blondie into a fox or something, and sending you both to your fathers. Mr. D. Chiron warned. Oh, all right, the director relented, letting out a frustrated sigh. There's one more option. But it's deadly foolishness, he rose. I'm off to Olympus for the emergency meeting. If any of the boys are here when I get back, I'll turn them into the animals of my choice. Do you understand? And Perseus Jackson, if you are at all smart, unlike your friend here. He pointed to Naruto again, who did nothing but raise a brow at the god. You'll see that's a much more sensible choice than what Chiron and Blondie feel you must do. With that said, Dionysus picked up a playing card, twisted it, and it became a security pass. With a snap of his fingers, the god was gone. Chiron smiled at Percy, but it was a tired and strained one. Please, all of you sit. They did. Chiron laid his cards on the table, a winning hand that he hadn't gotten to use. Tell me, Percy, he said, what did you make of the Hellhound? Hearing that name made the dark-haired half-blood shudder. He could take a guess at what Chiron wanted him to say. But Percy didn't feel like lying. It scared me, he said. If you hadn't shot it, I'd be dead. You'll meet worse, Percy. Far worse, before you're done. Done with what? The quests that you and Naruto will both be leading, of course. Will you accept it? Percy glanced at Grover, who was crossing his fingers. Then at Naruto, who as far as he could tell looked indifferent because he had his mask back on, but looking closer he could see that there was a small glimmer of hope in his eyes. He turned his attention back to Chiron. Sir, he said nervously, you haven't told me what it is yet. Chiron and Naruto grimaced. Well, that's the hard part, the details. Thunder rumbled again. The storm clouds had now reached the edge of the beach. As far as Percy could see, the sea and sky looked like they were boiling together. Poseidon and Zeus, Percy said, a realizing look forming on his face. They're fighting over something valuable, something that was stolen, aren't they? Chiron and Grover exchanged looks while Naruto raised a brow. Chiron sat forward in his wheelchair. How did you know that? Percy's face felt hot. He wished he hadn't opened his mouth. The weather since Christmas has been weird, like the sky and sea are fighting. Then a few days ago I talked to Annabeth, she mentioned something about a theft. He said. Naruto narrowed his eyes at him. That's not all, is it? He asked. Percy looked a little startled but shook his head. I've been having these dreams. He said. I knew it. Grover exclaimed. Hush, Satyr. Chiron all but ordered. But it is their quest. Grover exclaimed again, his eyes bright with excitement. It must be. Chiron sighed but nodded. True, but only the oracle can determine. Chiron said, stroking his beard. Nevertheless, Percy, you are correct. You father and Zeus are having their worst quarrel in centuries. They are fighting over something valuable that is stolen. To be precise, a lightning bolt. What? Percy asked with a nervous laugh. Do not take this lightly, Chiron warned. I'm not talking about some tinfoil-covered zigzag you would see in a second-grade play. He said. Naruto cut in. What we're talking about here, Percy, is a 2-foot-long cylinder of high-grade celestial bronze, capped at both ends with god-level explosives. Percy's eyes widened. Oh. Zeus's master bolt, Naruto continued, getting a far-off look. The symbol of his power, from which all other lightning bolts are patterned. The first weapon made by the Cyclopes for the war against the Titans, the bolt that sheared off the top of Mount Etna and hurled Cronus from his throne. The bolt I have based the Kirin Jutsu off of, the Master Bolt, which packs enough power to make mortal hydrogen bombs look like firecrackers. As he finished his explanation, Naruto looked to see everyone present was staring at him like he had grown another head, and he couldn't even hear anything from the seal or the amulet. What? How do you know so much about the bolt? Chiron asked. He was surprised that Naruto knew so much about it. Naruto shook his head and rolled his eyes. You really think I wouldn't research about the one thing that can hurt a tailed beast? He asked rhetorically, and saw their looks change to realization. Sorry, but I am not going to let anyone hurt the one person who's been with me since birth. He said. The others nodded. They had known about Helena for a while now and knew what their relationship was. Percy, however, picked up on something that Naruto had said before. Wait. You said you based that last technique you used on Ares after the Master Bolt. He said, making Naruto nod. You mean to tell me that the Master Bolt is just as powerful as that thing was? He asked. Again Naruto nodded, and grinned sheepishly. Well, I haven't seen the actual bolt in action, but I would expect that it has a similar and possibly greater damage rated than the Kirin does. He explained, rubbing the back of his head. Percy paled, beginning to realize what he was getting into. So the Master Bolt is missing? He asked, trying to shake off the shock of the revelation. Stolen, Chiron corrected. By who? By whom? Chiron once again corrected. Once a teacher, always a teacher, it seems. By you and Naruto. Percy's mouth fell open. Chiron held up a hand to stall against his protests. At least that's what Zeus thinks. During the winter solstice, at the last council of the gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades had an argument. It was the usual nonsense about who Mother Rhea liked best, what kind of disasters are better than the other, etc. Afterward, Zeus realized that his Master Bolt was missing, taken from the throne room under his very nose. He immediately blamed Poseidon. Now a god can't take another god's symbol of power directly, it's forbidden by the most ancient of divine laws. But Zeus believes your father convinced a human hero to take it. But I didn't dash. Patience and listen, child, Chiron said. Zeus has good reason to be suspicious. The forges of the Cyclopes are under the ocean, which gives Poseidon some influence over makers of his brother's weapons. Zeus believes Poseidon has taken it, and is now secretly having the Cyclopes build an arsenal of illegal copies, which might be used to topple Zeus from his throne. The only thing Zeus wasn't sure about was which hero Poseidon used to steal the bolt. And now that Poseidon and Hades have openly claimed you and Naruto, he has become convinced that Hades has been plotting with him, and that they used both of you for the theft. Added to the fact that you were both in New York over the winter holidays, you two could easily have snuck up to Olympus, and Zeus believes he had found his thieves. But neither of us have ever been to Olympus. Zeus is crazy. While Chiron and Grover glanced nervously up at the sky, Naruto let out a snort of laughter. I wholeheartedly agree with you, Zeus is crazy, he said. Guys, Grover said. We don't use the C word to describe the Lord of the Sky. Perhaps paranoid, Chiron suggested. But then again, Poseidon has tried to unseat Zeus before. I believe it was question 38 on your final exam. He looked at the two of them like he expected them to remember that. Naruto sighed and began to explain, since Percy obviously didn't remember, the golden net. He said, drawing their attention, Poseidon, Hera, and the other gods, trapped Zeus in a golden net until he promised to be a better ruler. Correct, Chiron said, nodding to him. And he has never trusted Poseidon since. Of course, Poseidon and Hades deny stealing the bolt. They took great offense at the accusation. Since then the three of them have arguing back and forth, threatening war. And now, you both have come along the proverbial last straws. But we're just kids, Percy exclaimed. Percy, Grover interrupted, if you were Zeus, and you already thought one of your brothers was plotting to overthrow you, and then both of them suddenly admit to breaking an oath dash. Hey, the shinobi world wasn't included in that oath. Naruto cut in, glaring at the now grinning sheepishly satyr. Right, sorry. He said before he continued, if one of your brothers suddenly admitted that he had broken the sacred oath he took after World War II, and that he's fathered a new mortal hero who might be used as a weapon against you, wouldn't that put a twist in your toga? He asked, after sending Naruto a look when he had said the word one. But I didn't do anything. Poseidon, my dad, he didn't really have this master bolt stolen, did he? Percy asked. Chiron sighed. Most thinking observers would agree that thievery is not Poseidon's or Hades' style. But the sea god is too proud to try to convince Zeus of that. Hades has been trying to stop their quarreling, but he can't do much because he can't visit Olympus, except on the winter solstice. Zeus has demanded that his bolt be returned by June 21st, the summer solstice. That's also the same date that Poseidon wants on apology for being called a thief. Hades, again, he can't do much, but he is doing his best to keep the peace between them. Other gods such as Hestia, Demeter, and Hera have done their best to make the two brothers cease since. But yours and Naruto's arrival has inflamed Zeus's temper. Now neither of the two will back down. Unless someone intervenes, unless the Master Bolt is found and returned to Zeus before the solstice, there will be war. And do you know what a fully fledged war would look like, Percy? Bad. Percy guessed. Naruto shook his head with a sigh, which drew everyone's attention to him. Percy, you should really pick up a book and read more often, he said, but continued before Percy could retort. Imagine the world in chaos. Nature at war with itself. Olympus forced to choose sides between Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Destruction. Carnage. Millions dead. The Western civilization turned into a battleground so big it would make the Trojan War look like a water balloon fight. Bad, Percy repeated. And you and I, Percy Jackson, would be the first to feel Zeus's wrath. It started to rain. All around the camp people stopped what they were doing to stare up at the sky. Percy realized at that moment just how serious the situation was. Naruto and he had brought this storm to Half-Blood Hill. Zeus was punishing the whole camp because of them. He was furious. "So we have to find the stupid bolt," he said through grit teeth, "and return it to Zeus." "What better peace offering," Chiron said, "than to have the sons of Poseidon and Hades return Zeus's property? If they don't have it, then where is the thing?" "I don't really know, but I believe I know the general direction." The centaur's expression was grim. "Part of a prophecy I had years ago. Well, some of the lines make sense to me now. But there is something else you must retrieve along with the bolt. But before I can say more, you must officially take up the quest. You too must seek the counsel of the oracle." "Why can't you just tell us where to go beforehand? And what is the other thing you suddenly throw at us?" Percy asked. "In order," Chiron said. "First, because if I did you wouldn't be so sure about taking the challenge, and second, it is something that went missing at the same time as the bolt." Percy stared at him for a moment, before he shook his head. "Whatever," he muttered. "You agree then?" Percy looked over to Grover, who nodded encouragingly. And then at Naruto, who shrugged at him. "I don't know about you, Percy, but I would rather not feel what it's like to have a gazillion volts of electricity running through my body." Percy's sweat dropped at his statement, but could see his point. "All right," he said. "It's better than being turned into a dolphin." Chiron looked to Naruto. He nodded to the centaur to show his decision. Chiron nodded to them both. "Very well then," he said. "It's time for you two to consult the oracle," he said. "Go upstairs, Percy Jackson, Naruto Uzumaki, to the attic. When you come back down, assuming you're still sane, we will talk more." 4 flights of stairs ladder, and the two half-bloods were staring at a green trapdoor in the ceiling of the big house. Naruto sighed and pulled the cord. The door swung open, and a wooden ladder clattered into place. Naruto looked to Percy, who was beginning to look a little hesitant. "Well, it's now or never," he said, and they both ascended the ladder. The warm air in the room smelled like mildew, rotten wood, and something that made Percy shiver. It was a smell he remembered from biology class. Reptiles. The air smelled of snakes. "Is that a mummy?" Percy hoarsely whispered to Naruto as they caught sight of what was beside the window. I think it is," he whispered back. He had seen some strange things in his life, but this was by far stranger than anything. Looking at it sent chills up their spines. And that was before she sat up on her stool and opened her mouth. A green mist poured from the mummy's mouth, coiling over the floor in thick tendrils, hissing like 20,000 snakes. Percy stumbled back, but Naruto latched a hand on his shoulder to keep him in place. And then inside their heads they heard it. A raspy voice that was slithering into their ears and coiling around their brains. "I am the spirit of Delphi, speaker of the prophecies of Phoebus Apollo, slayer of the mighty Python. Approach, speakers, and ask." Percy wanted to run away and never come back, but Naruto pushed him to the front. He sent a small glare to his friend but turned his attention back to the mummy spewing green mist and asked, "What is my destiny?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the mist began to thicken around them, and collected around the table that was filled with pickled monster parts. Then 4 men were sitting around the table, playing cards. As the mist became clearer, Percy could make out the men's faces. It was Gabe and his buddies. His fists clenched. He knew it was fake, but it still made him mad to see his stepfather. The image of Gabe turned to them and spoke in the same raspy voice of the oracle, "You shall go west, and face the god that has turned." The image on the right looked up and said in the same voice, "You shall find the stolen items, and see them safely returned." The one on the left, the one Naruto had won the old teddy bear from, dealt 2 poker chips and looked up to say, "You shall be betrayed by the one that calls you a friend." And then Eddie, the building manager, delivered the worst line of all, and you shall fail to save what matters most, in the end. The figures dissolved, leaving a stunned Percy, to stare at the spot they were at. The mummy turned to Naruto. Naruto sighed and asked the same as Percy, "What is my destiny?" Again the mist began to thicken around them, and then 4 figures formed, all standing in a circle around him. As the figures sharpened, Naruto could begin to make out their faces, and he gasped when he saw them. "Jiji? Inu Naizen? Kuranai-nichan? Konan Kasan?" he asked, bewildered. And they were indeed standing there. Hiruzen Sarutobi, Kakashi Hatake, Kuranai Ui, and Konan Harakan, were standing there in front of him. The figures ignored his stunned face as Sarutobi stepped forward to deliver the first line of his prophecy: "You shall travel to the west, retrieve what was stolen and see it safely returned." Inu/Kakashi stepped forward to say, "You shall be tested by the gods to prove your worth." Kuranai moved to the front and said her piece: "Feelings shall be found in the tensest of moments." It was then that Konan delivered a shocking revelation: "You shall travel to the place you once called home to stop the destruction of those you hold dear." And then they all spoke the last and most confusing line: "You will fight the one you cannot remember for the power of the 9th beast." With that the figures of Naruto's surrogate and adopted family faded, and the mist receded into the mummy's mouth, which closed with a resounding snap, and the mummy reclined against the wall like she had never moved. Even though they wanted to protest and ask what she meant, Naruto and Percy both got the feeling that they could stand there until they themselves became shriveled up husks, and they would never learn anything else. Their audience with the oracle was over. "Well?" Chiron asked as they exited the big house. They slumped into seats at the pinnacle table, and looked to one another. "You go first, Percy, I still need to think about some things," Naruto said, as he put his head on the table. The others looked to the dark-haired half-blood for him to tell them what the oracle had said. He sighed. "She said we would retrieve what was stolen." Grover sat forward, chewing on the remains of a Diet Coke can. "That's great," he said excitedly. Chiron, however, was looking at him thoughtfully. "What did the oracle say exactly?" he asked. "This is important." Ears still ringing with the mummy's reptilian voice, Percy repeated what he had heard. She said we would go west and I would face a god who has turned and retrieve what was stolen and see it safely returned." "I knew it," Grover said. Chiron didn't look all that convinced. "Anything else?" Percy didn't want to tell them. Several lines of the prophecy still rang in his head. What friend would betray him? He didn't have that many. But the last line was the one he was mostly worried about. He couldn't wrap his mind around why a prophecy would give him a guest and say, "Oh, by the way, you'll fail." How the hell could he confess that? "No," he said. "That's about it." Chiron looked suspiciously at him and studied his face, before he turned to Naruto. "And you, Naruto?" he asked. Naruto's head rose to look at them and he sighed. "Mine said that I would travel west, find what was stolen and see it safely returned." Chiron raised a brow. "What else?" he asked. Naruto sighed again and told the next line. "She said I would be tested by the gods to prove my worth." Chiron's and Grover's eyes widened. What?" Grover asked. "Wasn't you fight with Ares enough to prove that?" "I don't know, but is there anything else she said, Naruto?" Chiron asked. Naruto debated the option of telling them the rest of it, and decided against it. He knew it would all be revealed in time. "No, that's pretty much it," he said. Chiron studied what he could see of his face, and couldn't detect any lies. He nodded in acceptance. "Very well, you two. But know this, the oracle's words often have double meanings. Don't dwell on them too much. The truth is not always clear until the events themselves come to pass," he informed. They nodded. "Okay," Percy said, looking to change the subject. "So where do we go? Who's this god that's turned?" Think, Percy, Chiron said. If Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades go to war, who is it that stands the most at gain? Someone else who wants to take over, Percy guessed. Yes, quite. Someone who stands to gain much if there is a war among the gods. Someone who thrives on the mayhem of war. Someone who will grow more and more powerful as the war goes on. Chiron explained. Percy thought about all the gods he knew, about the subject of war, and about who grew more powerful the longer one went on. His eyes widened. Ares, he asked, somewhat scared about the answer he would get. Chiron nodded. The god of war is the only possibility. A scarp of aluminum fell from Grover's open mouth. Whoa, wait. What? He asked. I thought that it would have been Hades. He ignored the heated glare Naruto sent him. I mean, the only one of the gods who reside in the West is Hades. And the prophecies said they would be traveling in that direction. He said, now starting to sweat under Naruto's gaze, but he tried to ignore it the best he could. Chiron nodded to the satyr. While that would be the next most possible situation, it is not. He said. Why? Chiron looked over to Naruto, who sighed. Dad's helm was also stolen. He said. His words made the other two freeze and stare at him shocked. Was all they could say. Naruto sighed again and rubbed the bridge of his nose. You heard me. My dad's helm of darkness was stolen at the same time as the Master Bolt. He said. But the Fury Dash, Grover started but was interrupted by Naruto, was a test. Again they froze. Naruto groaned, and began to explain. Dad sent the kindly one to Yancy Academy, to test the both of us. His explanation only made them more confused, and he sighed, just don't think about it too much. A hellhound got into the forest. Chiron continued, trying to change the subject. True, they can only be summoned from the fields of punishment, but almost anyone can summon them if they have the means to do so. He explained, and Ares, being a god, could have easily summoned it. It's either that or he has a spy in the camp. And most likely expects Hades and Poseidon to use the two of you to clear their names. And would like nothing more than to kill you both. Naruto more so now after he defeated him. Great, Percy muttered, two gods who want to kill us. Ares sent a minion to steal the bolt, Chiron insisted. He must have hidden it somewhere in the west, knowing full well that Zeus would blame either Hades or Poseidon. I don't pretend to understand the war god's motives, but one thing is clear. He said, and gave Naruto and Percy a pointed stare. You must go west. Find the Master Bolt and the Helm of Darkness, and reveal the truth. A fire began to burn in Percy's stomach. The weirdest thing was that it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The desire for revenge. Ares had tried to kill him at least once with the Hellhound, and possibly before that with the Minotaur. It was his fault that his mother was gone. And now he was trying to frame him, Naruto, and their dads for a crime they didn't commit. He was ready to take him on. Besides, Naruto beat him. How hard could it really be? But the small part of his brain that was still sane said, whoa, boy. Hold your horses. Ares is a god, you're just a kid. And if you can remember it, Naruto almost lost on more than one occasion. Percy sweat dropped his lapse of memory, and looked to his side to see what the others were thinking about the situation. Grover was trembling. He's started eating the pinnacle cards like they were some kind of potato chips. The satyr needed to complete a quest with them, to get his searcher's license. But the thought of how he could ask him to come with them on it, especially when the oracle said that they were destined to fail. It was suicide. Naruto had a determined look plastered firmly onto his face. What he could see of it anyway, and he knew his answer. But Percy had to know something before he made any decisions about this. Look, if we know it's Ares, he said. Why can't we just tell the other gods? Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades could just find him and bust some heads. Chiron shook his head. Suspecting and knowing are not the same. Besides, even if the other gods suspect Ares and I suspect that Poseidon does, they can't retrieve the bolt themselves. Ares has gone into hiding to heal his wounds from his fight with Naruto. And when he hides, it damn near impossible to find him. Chiron said. Percy looked skeptical. Chiron, seeing his look, shook his head. Just know that the gods always operate through heroes. Percy raised a brow, and even Naruto looked a little interested. Why? Again Chiron sighed, because heroes have certain privileges that the gods don't. They can go anywhere, challenge anyone, as long as they're bold enough and strong enough to do it. That's why Ares didn't challenge Naruto directly. He took advantage of his anger, and led him into challenging him. It is also why no god can be held responsible for a hero's actions. So you're saying we're being used? Naruto said, his eyes blank. I'm saying that Hades and Poseidon claiming the two of you now, are no accidents. It was a risky gamble on their parts. But they are in a desperate situation. They need you. Naruto was smiling slightly under his mask. He understood that his dad needed him when he read the note he left him. But it still felt good to hear it be said out loud. He looked over to Percy and saw that his emotions were flashing across his face like the bits of glass in a kaleidoscope. Some of those were resentment, gratefulness, happiness, and anger. It was obvious he didn't know what to think about the situation. Percy looked up at the centaur across from him. You've known that I was Poseidon's, and that Naruto was Hades all along, haven't you? He asked, his eyes narrow. Naruto's ears perked when he heard the question and directed his own attention to Chiron. I've had my suspicions. As I said, I've spoken to the oracle, too. The boys got the feeling that there was a lot that he wasn't telling them about this prophecy of his. But they decided they wouldn't worry about it for now. After all, they were holding back just as much of their own prophecies too. So let me get this straight. Percy said, we're supposed to go west and confront the Lord of War. Check, Chiron said. Find two of the most powerful magic items in the universe. Sounds about right, Naruto said. And get them back to the underworld, and Olympus before the summer solstice, in 10 days. Yep. Grover said, gulping down the ace of hearts. Percy turned his attention to the satyr when he said this. Grover did look a little nervous, but the determination was burning in his eyes. You don't have to go, Percy told him. I can't ask that of you. Neither can I, Naruto added as he got up and went to stand by the railing. Grover shook his head and stood up, brushing the shredded cards and aluminum bits off his shirt. You both saved my life. If you're serious about wanting me along, I won't let you guys down. Percy was relieved. Grover was one of the only friends he had had for longer than a few months. He wasn't sure what a satyr could do against the forces of Ares, but he felt better knowing he was going to be there with them. He nodded, all the way, G-Man. Naruto turned to Chiron from his position by the rail. So where exactly do we go? All the oracle said was to travel west. Chiron looked thoughtful for a moment. I don't know where you will find the helm or the bolt, but the entrance to the underworld is always in the west. It moves from age to age, just like Olympus. Right now, of course, it's in America. And you should be able to find them on your way there. Where? Chiron looked surprised. I thought that would be obvious enough for you, he said, and Naruto's brow began to twitch. Chiron chuckled. The entrance to the underworld is in Los Angeles. Oh, Percy said. Naturally. So we just get on a plane dash. No. Grover shrieked, and the others looked at Percy like he was crazy. Percy, what are you thinking? Have you ever been on a plane in your life? Percy shook his head, feeling embarrassed. His mother had never taken him anywhere by plane. She'd always told him that they didn't have enough money. Besides, her parents had died in a plane crash. Percy, think, Chiron said. You are the son of the sea god, and Naruto is the son of the death god. Both your father's bitterest rival is Zeus, Lord of Sky. Your mother knew better than to trust you in an airplane, and Naruto, and his mother, up to 4 years ago, had never even heard of a plane before. You two would be in Zeus's domain. Neither of you would come down again alive anyway. Then couldn't we use one of those eagles that Naruto summoned? Zeus wouldn't hurt his animal symbol, would he? Percy asked. Naruto shook his head. It wouldn't work, Percy. He said, drawing a confused look from his friend. That was the first time I had to summon an eagle for battle. So it was mostly a surprise for Zeus when he saw it. I doubt after what he saw, that he'll care if he hurts an eagle, just to get to us. He said. As he finished explaining, lightning cackled and thunder boomed overhead. Like it was daring them to try taking to the sky. Okay, Percy said, trying not to look at the storm. We'll travel over land. That's right, Chiron said. 2 companions may accompany you. But I already have 2, don't I? Percy asked. Chiron shook his head. Not exactly. He said, Naruto has his own quest to take care of, and is only tagging along. He explained. Percy nodded, not exactly understanding the reasoning. Now, as I was saying, 2 companions may join you. Grover is one. The other had already volunteered, if you will accept her help. Gee, Percy said, feigning surprise. Who else would be stupid enough to volunteer for a quest like this? He asked. Naruto snickered. The air behind Chiron shimmered. Annabeth became visible, stuffing her Yankees cap into her back pocket. I've been waiting a long time for a quest, Seaweed Brain, she said. Athena is no fan of Poseidon or Hades, but if you two are going to save the world, I'm the best person to make sure neither of you screw it up. If you do say so yourself, Percy said. I suppose you have a plan, wise girl. Annabeth's cheeks colored. Do you two want my help or not? Naruto smirked when he saw her reddened cheeks. We're happy to have you. Percy nodded in agreement, grinning lightly. A group of 4, he said. That'll work. Excellent, Chiron said. This afternoon, we can take you as far as the bus terminal in Manhattan. After that, you are on your own. Lightning flashed. Rain poured down on the meadows that were never supposed to have violent weather. No time to waste, Chiron said. I think you should all get to packing. It didn't take long for them all to pack. The Kemp store loaned them $100 in mortal money and 20 golden drachmas, the money used by the gods. Chiron had given Annabeth, Percy, and Naruto a canteen of nectar and a Ziploc bag full of ambrosia squares each. He said that they were to be used in emergencies only, and that while it could heal almost any injury, it was fatal in large doses. Annabeth was brining her Yankees cap, a 12th birthday present from her mother, and a book on famous classical architecture written in ancient Greek, to read when she got bored. And finally a long bronze knife, hidden under her shirt sleeve. Percy was sure it would get them caught the first time they went through a metal detector. Grover was wearing his fake feet and his jeans to pass as human. He was also wearing a green Rasta-style cap, to make sure that his horns were kept out of view. In his pack was some scrap metal and apples to snack on. His reed pipes were in his pocket. Naruto had packed everything he needed into a sealing scroll. He was of course taking his necklace of darkness in case he needed it. His sword and ninja gear were all stored in seals on hands. Percy had just packed a change of clothes and that was it. He didn't have any magic items or anything like that, so he didn't have much to take. They waved goodbye to the other campers, took one last look at the strawberry fields, the ocean, and the big house, then they hiked up Half-Blood Hill to the tall pine tree that Thalia used to inhabit. Speaking of the daughter of Zeus, she was almost jumping out of her skin to finally get to see the real world outside of the camp. Excitedly, Chan Naruto asked as they stood at the top next to Kirin in his wheelchair. You have no idea, Naruto-kun. Thalia said, I finally get to see how much the world has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean the camp is nice and all, but it doesn't make up for the real thing. Naruto nodded to her as Kirin introduced him and Percy to Argus, the 100-eyed security guard of the camp. Just as the group was about to start down the hill when they heard footsteps behind them. Luke came running up the hill, carrying a pair of basketball shoes in one hand and a blue nylon backpack on his shoulder. Hey, he panted. Glad I caught you guys. Annabeth blushed, the way she always did when Luke was around. Naruto however narrowed his eyes at him. I just wanted to say good luck, Luke said to them. And I thought maybe you could use these. He handed Percy the shoes and Naruto the backpack. Looking to the shoes Luke said, Maya. Whitebird's wings sprouted out of the heels, startling Percy so much, he dropped them. The shoes proceeded to flap around on the ground for a moment before the wings folded up and receded back into the heels. Awesome! Grover exclaimed, while the other 2 boys stared at the shoes surprised. Luke smiled. Those served me well when I was on my own quest. They were a gift from Dad. Of course, I don't use them much these days, he trailed as his expression turned downcast. What about the backpack? Naruto asked. Luke looked to him and grinned sheepishly, oh, just if you need some more storage space. I also added some more supplies to it. In case you run out of the provisions the camp gave you. Naruto unzipped it and looked inside to see that what Luke said was true. Inside there was $20 in cash, a pouch full of drachmas, and some extra ambrosia and nectar. After seeing for himself what was inside the bag, Percy looked up to Luke with a small smile. Hey man, he said. Thanks. Naruto however wasn't so sure about his gifts, and just shrugged to him and slung the bag over his shoulder. Listen, Percy, Naruto. Luke said, looking a little uncomfortable. A lot of hopes are riding on you guys. So just kill some monsters for me, okay? Percy nodded and shook Luke's hand. When Luke offered it to Naruto, the blonde looked at it for a moment before he sighed, took it into his own and gave it a firm shake. After that Luke patted Grover's head between his horns, then gave a goodbye hug to Annabeth, who looked like she was about to pass out. Naruto again smirked at her, and once Luke was gone, said to her in a teasing voice, "You're hyperventilating." The girl turned her head away, to hide her worsening blush. "I'm not." Percy, seeing what Naruto was doing, grinned and said, "And yet you let him capture the flag instead of you, didn't you?" "Oh, why do I want to go anywhere with you two?" Annabeth grumbled as she stomped down the side of the hill, where the white SUV waited on the shoulder of the road. Argus followed, jingling his car keys. Naruto shook his head in amusement, and turned to see Percy picking up the shoes Luke had given them. A sudden bad feeling struck him. "You know you won't be able to use those." Percy nodded to him. "Yeah, I know," he said. "But I couldn't just turn him down, could I?" Naruto sighed and muttered something about friends with bleeding hearts. But they both got an idea, and turned to Grover, grinning. "Hey Grover," Percy said, getting his attention. "You want a magic item?" Naruto asked. His eyes lit up. "Me?" They nodded to him, and a short while later, they had laced the sneakers over his fake feet, and had the world's first flying goat boy ready for takeoff. Grover grinned excitedly. "Maya," he shouted, and the shoes sprouted their wings. He was able to get off the ground fine, but he lost his balance and toppled over, causing his backpack to drag on the ground behind him as the winged shoes dragged him down the hill. Naruto chuckled and shouted after him, "Practice, you just need practice." "Easy for you to say," Grover yelled back, his head almost hitting a rock. "You aren't the one being dragged by you hoofs by a pair of crazy flying sneakers." Naruto chuckled again and began to chase after him to help. After Percy had climbed into the van with the others, they began their trek to the city. Argus drove them out of the countryside and into western Long Island. For Percy it was weird to be on the highway, the others were sitting beside him like they were normal carpoolers. After 2 weeks at Camp Half-Blood, the real world felt like a fantasy. He found himself staring at every McDonald's sign, every kid in the back of his parents' car, every billboard and shopping mall. Thalia wasn't doing much better than he was either. To her, being trapped inside a tree had felt like decades had passed by in the blink of an eye. So she was staring at everything that passed by, almost like she was trying to engrave it into her memory. Naruto grinned as he could feel her excitement, through the mental link. But before he could comment on it, he heard Percy say something to Annabeth. So far so good, 10 miles and not a single monster. And he, along with Annabeth, sighed at his naivete. Annabeth gave Percy an irritated look. It's bad luck to talk that way, seaweed brain. Remind me again, why do you hate me so much? Percy asked, and Naruto shook his head, and forced himself to keep looking forward, but a small, almost unnoticeable smirk took root on his face. I don't hate you, Annabeth said. Could have fooled me, Percy retorted. She folded her invisibility cap. Look, we're just not supposed to get along, okay? Our parents are rivals. Why? She sighed. How many reasons do you want? She asked. One time my mom caught your dad and his girlfriend in one of her temples, which, may I add, is a hugely disrespectful. Then another time they were competing to be the patron god for the city of Athens. Your dad created some stupid salt water spring as his gift. My mom created the olive tree. The people saw her gift as the better one, and named the city after her. Don't forget that he cursed Athens to never have enough water, and by doing so the city started having water shortages. Naruto added, unmoving. The others looked at Naruto strangely but shook their heads. In the front seat, Argus smirked and an eye winked at Naruto through the rearview mirror. They continued the rest of the trip through the city in silence. Argus dropped them off at the Greyhound station on the Upper East Side, not that far from where Percy's mom and Gabe lived. As Naruto got out of the van, his and Percy's attention was drawn to a soggy flyer taped to the side of a mailbox. On half had Percy's picture and the other had Naruto's on it. Above those it had, "Have you seen these boys?" printed in big red letters. Percy ripped it down before the other two could see it, and Naruto burned it with a small fire jutsu. Argus unloaded their bags, made sure they got their tickets, and then drove away, the eye on the back of his hand opening to watch them as he pulled out of the parking lot. As the group of four waited for the bus, Percy couldn't help but think about how close they were to his old apartment. On a normal day his mother would be home from work. Gabe was probably there right now, not even missing her or even caring that she was gone. Grover and Naruto noticed where he was looking and knew what he was thinking about. You want to know why she married him, Percy? Grover asked, shouldering his backpack. Percy turned and stared at him. Were you reading my mind or something? Grover shrugged, just your emotions. I guess that I forgot to tell you that satyrs can do that. You were thinking about your stepdad, right? Percy nodded, wondering what else Grover had forgotten to tell him. Naruto chose this time to speak up. She married Gabe for you, he said. You call him smelly, but if you're a satyr it's a lot worse. Isn't it, Grover? The satyr nodded, taking a sniff of the air, and grimaced when he did. You've got no idea. The guy has a really foul aura, yuck. I can smell him from here. I can still smell traces on you, Percy, and you haven't been around him for a week and a half. Thanks, Percy said, gritting his teeth. Where's the nearest shower? Naruto and Grover sighed, shaking their heads. You should be grateful, Percy. Grover said, your stepfather smells so repulsively human he could mask the presence of any demigod. As soon as I took a whiff inside that Camaro, I knew, Gabe has been covering your scent for years. If you hadn't lived with him every summer, you probably would have been found by monsters long ago. As Grover finished his small speech, Naruto was nodding along in agreement. Percy, however, didn't look like he believed Grover that much, and Naruto sighed. The point is, Percy, your mom stayed with him to protect you. She was a smart lady. She must have loved you a lot to put up with that guy, if it makes you feel any better. It didn't. But Percy tried not to show it. I'll see her again, he thought. She isn't gone. He wondered if Grover could still read his emotions, or if Naruto could do the same, as mixed up as they were. He was really glad he had Annabeth, Naruto, and Grover with him, but the truth was he felt guilty. He hadn't been completely honest with them. He hadn't told them the real reason he had said yes to the quests. In truth, he didn't care about retrieving Zeus's Master Bolt, Hades' helm, saving the world, or helping his father out of trouble. In fact, the more he thought about it, the more he found himself resenting Poseidon for never visiting him, never helping his mom, never even sending a lousy child support check. In Percy's eyes, Poseidon had only claimed him because he needed a job done. All Percy cared about was his mother. Ares had taken her unfairly, and Ares was going to give her back no matter the cost. You will be betrayed by the one who calls you a friend, the oracle whispered in his mind. You will fail to save what matters worse in the end. Shut up, Percy said to it. The rain kept coming down. They got restless waiting for the bus and decided to play some hacky sack with one of Grover's apples. While Annabeth's skills were good, she could bounce it off her knee, her elbow, and her shoulder. Naruto could do all that and more. He could bounce it off of his fingertips, his heels, hell, even his nose. Percy wasn't too bad himself. The game was ended when the apple was passed a little too close to Grover's mouth. In one giant goat bite, the hack sack disappeared, core, stem, and all. Grover tried to apologize through his embarrassment, but the others were too busy cracking up. When the bus finally arrived, Grover and Naruto started looking around, Grover sniffing like it was enchilada day in the school cafeteria. What is it? Percy asked when he saw this. Naruto shook his head. I don't know. He said tensely, but I sense foul chakra nearby. And there's more than one signature. Grover continued to sniff the air around them, and shook his head, still looking nervous. Maybe it's nothing. But Percy could tell it wasn't nothing. He started to look over his shoulder, like he was expecting an attack. See, come on, Annabeth said, nervously looking around. Let's just get going. Percy nodded, yeah. The four of them were glad when they got on the bus. They stowed their backpacks. Annabeth kept slapping her Yankees cap nervously against her thigh, and Naruto still felt the chakra signatures, and they were getting closer. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen soon. His concerns were proven correct when he sensed not one but three very foul chakras boarding the bus. He looked up to view the last passengers getting on to see three very, very ugly old ladies. They each looked too ugly to describe. Naruto knew immediately when he saw them that they were the monsters he sensed, and knew that Grover and Annabeth had sensed them too. Grover signified by his stiffening, and Annabeth when she clamped her hand on Percy's knee. Gee guys, she stuttered, her eyes wide. Naruto gulped, and nodded as Percy seemed to shrink down in his seat. We see them, he said, readying himself for a fight. The ugly ladies sat in the front row right behind the driver. The two on the aisle crossed their legs over the walkway, making an X. While it seemed casual enough, to the half-bloods it sent a clear message: nobody leaves. The bus pulled out of the station and headed through the slick streets of Manhattan. What kind of monsters are they? Percy asked, trying to keep his voice quivering. The Harpies. Annabeth said, the sisters of Iris. The ones sent to punish King Phineus for revealing the secrets of the gods. Zeus's hounds. During Annabeth's explanation, Percy felt a continuously growing fear in his stomach, and Grover began to shake in fear. All three of them, Io, Sileno, and Ocypet. He whimpered. The immortals. It's okay, Annabeth said, thinking hard. The Harpies. 3 of the worst monsters Zeus controls. No problem. No problem. We'll just slip out the windows. They don't open. Grover moaned. The back. Percy suggested. No exit. Naruto pointed out, keeping his arms crossed, his hands over the weapon seals on each of his arms. Besides, I doubt that even if there was one it'll help any. He said, keeping his eyes firmly trained on the front of the bus. They were turning onto North Avenue now and heading for the Lincoln Tunnel. Why? Percy asked. They wouldn't attack us with witnesses around, would they? Mortals don't have good eyes. Annabeth reminded him, glancing from the front and back to the others constantly. Their brains can only process what they see through the mist. They'll see 3 really ugly old ladies killing us, won't they? Annabeth thought about that, her eyes still looking around for a possible exit. Hard to say. But we can't count on mortals for help. Maybe an emergency exit in the roof. Before she could finish, they hit the Lincoln Tunnel and the lights went out, except for the ones running down the aisle. Without the rain pounding on the roof, it was eerily quiet. The first of the Harpies got up and turned to the rest of the bus. I have to use the restroom, she announced in an extremely flat voice, almost like she had rehearsed it. As do I, the second one said. Me too, the third said. They began walking down the aisle. I got it, Annabeth said. Percy, take my hat. Naruto, you have your necklace with you. What? Percy asked, confused. Yeah, why? Naruto asked, a brow raised. You guys are the ones they want. Turn yourselves invisible and go up the aisle. Let them pass you. You might be able to get to the front and get away. Huh, was Naruto's intelligent question. But you guys Percy tried, but Annabeth interrupted. There's an outside chance that might not notice us, she said. You're sons of 2 of the big 3. Your combined smells might be overpowering. We can't just leave you, Percy protested, Naruto nodding in agreement. Don't worry about us, Grover said. Go. Percy's hands trembled. He felt like a coward. He took the Yankees cap. But before he put it on, he looked over to Naruto, who had the control crystal to his necklace in hand, and Percy smirked to him. I've only ever seen him this persistent when we're doing pranks in school, he commented offhanded before he slapped the cap onto his head and vanished from sight. Naruto smirked to himself when he realized what Percy meant. Yeah. Good times, he said, chuckling, connecting the crystal top to the chain, and he himself vanished, leaving an embarrassed Grover and a confused Annabeth behind. Annabeth turned to the red-faced satyr with a questioning look. Pranks? She asked, confusion clear in her voice. Grover palmed his face. Don't ask, he muttered. Back with the other 2, Naruto had caught up to Percy. Well, he could tell Percy was beside him, and they were sneaking up the aisle. They managed to make it up 7 or 8 aisles before they had to duck into empty seats as the Harpies passed. The one that appeared to be the leader stopped, sniffing the air, and looked straight through Naruto, and then Percy. Their hearts were pounding. Apparently she didn't see anything. She and her sisters kept going. They were free. They made it to the front of the bus. Said bus was almost out of the Lincoln Tunnel now. Percy was about to press the emergency stop button when they heard a very loud and hideous screeching from the back row. The ugly old ladies weren't ugly old ladies anymore. Their faces were the same, those couldn't possibly get any uglier, but their bodies had gone through a drastic change. Their arms and hands had changed into thick feathery wings and had grown claws, their legs were now scaled, three-toed taloned bird feet. And their bodies had sprouted feathers and had expanded to twice their previous size. The harpies surrounded Grover and Annabeth, lashing with their claws, screeching, "Where is it? Where?" The other people on the bus were screaming, cowering in their seats. It was clear they saw something. "They aren't here," Annabeth shouted, brandishing her knife. "They're gone." The harpies raised their claws. Grover grabbed a tin can from his snack bag and prepared to throw it. Naruto wasn't sure about what exactly happened after that. Because the next thing he felt was the bus jerk to the left, he lost his balance and topped over into the seat next to him. "Damn it, Percy, you're going to pay for that," he muttered to himself as the bus continued to jerk from left to right. Everyone was howling as they were thrown around the bus. They heard, what Percy hoped was, the sound of 3 harpies smashing against the windows when the bus hit the side of the tunnel, causing sparks to shoot out due to the friction. "Damn it, Percy!" Naruto yelled, holding the edge of a seat to stay balanced. "Just get the bus to stop," he shouted as they careened out of the tunnel and back into the rainstorm. People and monsters were tossed around the bus, the cars outside plowed aside like bowling pins. Even though he was wrestling with an invisible force, the driver was able to find an exit, and they shot off the highway, through half a dozen traffic lights, and ended up barreling down a rural New Jersey road. There were trees to the left and the Hudson River to the right. The driver seemed to be veering toward the river. If Naruto was going to make Percy pay for causing the bus to go out of control before, then now he was going to make sure that whatever injury he got would be long-lasting, because the bus suddenly spun a full circle on the wet asphalt and crashed into the trees. Naruto groaned as he opened his eyes, only to blush in embracement at what he saw. Because when he had fallen in the crash, Naruto's face had ended up no less than 2 inches from a girl dressed in a mini-skirt, and due to his position on the floor he was getting a full view of her pink panties. All he could do was thank the gods that he was invisible. Because he found himself staring with a massive blush on his face. "Eyes on the battle, Naruto," Helena growled to him. He could hear a smaller growl coming from the amulet. "Alright." He shakily thought back, getting up, and turning his attention to the fight as people began to surge past him and out through the now open door. Naruto saw that the harpies had regained their balance and were now lashing with their claws at Annabeth while said girl was waving her knife around and yelling in ancient Greek, telling them to back off. Grover was throwing his tin cans. As Naruto saw what was happening, an idea struck both him and Percy at the same time. They took off their respective invisibility items and shouted, "Hey uglies!" The harpies turned, baring their yellow teeth at them. Obviously they were not happy for the ugly comment. The exit suddenly sounded like a pretty good idea at the moment. The leader of the sisters stalked up the aisle in a similar manner that Mrs. Dodds had in algebra class when they had gotten FS on their tests. All the while her claws were twitching, the lighting was making them look extra deadly as it danced across them. Her sisters hopped on top of the seats on either side of her and crawled towards them like lions about to pounce on their prey. "Naruto Uzumaki, and Perseus Jackson," she said, her voice sounding dry as the desert, as if she hadn't had anything to drink in years. "You have offended Lord Zeus. You both shall die." "You looked better as an old lady," Naruto retorted. She growled. Annabeth and Grover moved up behind the harpies cautiously, looking for any openings. Percy brought out the ballpoint pen he received from Chiron and uncapped it. Riptide elongated into a shimmering double-edged sword. The harpies hesitated. Naruto smirked behind his mask when he saw their reactions and he unsealed his own. When Naruto's blade came into sight, the harpies froze and started to shake in fear. "No. Not that blade," the one on the left shouted, beginning to back away, along with her sisters. Naruto along with everyone else had confused looks. He turned to Percy and they stared at each other for a moment before they both shrugged and began to walk forward to the cowering harpies. Annabeth took the chance to attack. She jumped onto the nearest harpy's back and sunk her knife, hilt deep, into it. The monster let out a cry of pain as she exploded into sand. The other two yelled in outrage when they saw their sister die. And the leader snarled back at them, "Zeus will destroy you. Hades will never have his son's soul," she promised, and they lunged at them despite their fear of Naruto's blade. Naruto and Percy reacted immediately. Percy struck Harpy number 1 with the hilt of his sword, sending her toppling backward into a seat. Naruto sliced at Harpy number 2, but she managed to barely dodge in the limited space, and slashed her claws at him. He jumped on top of a seat to avoid it, but the seat wasn't so lucky and got torn to shreds. Occiput came at him again, but Naruto jumped above her and brought his sword down on her back. As soon as the blade connected with her feathers, she burst into sand like her sister before her. Naruto turned to where Percy was to see him just about to bring the blade down on the struggling to get up Io. Thunder rocked the bus, and Naruto's eyes widened when he realized what was about to happen. "Guys," he yelled, getting their attention, "get out. Now." The others didn't need any more encouragement. They rushed outside and found the other passengers wandering around in a daze. Some were arguing with the driver, and others were running around in circles yelling, "We're going to die." A Hawaiian shirt tourist with a camera snapped Naruto's and Percy's photo before they could recap/reseal their swords. "Our bags," Grover realized. "We left our dash." "I've got them," Naruto called out to him, holding up a scroll. Boom! The windows of the bus exploded as the passengers ran for cover. Lightning shredded a huge crater in the roof, but an angry wail from inside told them that Io was still very much alive, and extremely angry. "Run," Annabeth said. "She's calling for reinforcements. We have to get out of here." They plunged into the woods as the rain poured down, the bus in flames behind them, and nothing but darkness ahead. A few hours later we find the group of young heroes trudging through the woods along the New Jersey riverbank. The glow of New York made the night sky yellow behind them and the smell of the Hudson reeking in their noses. "You know, in some strange way, it's good to know that there are Greek gods out there," Percy grumbled, stumbling over a tree root. His statement drew the others' attention. "Why's that?" Annabeth asked, a curious look on her face. "Because we have somebody to blame when things go wrong," he said simply. Naruto snorted in amusement as the other two sighed and shook their heads. "I know what you mean, Percy," he said, getting everyone's attention. "Huh?" Annabeth and Grover asked. Naruto shook his head. "Well, one way to explain it would be, for instance, when you're walking away from a bus that's just been attacked by monster hags and blown up by lightning, and it's raining on top of everything else, most people might think that's just really bad luck. But when you're a half-blood, you understand that some divine force really is out to get you, and will constantly try to mess up your day." Percy nodded in agreement. "Exactly. You two really shouldn't talk about the gods like that," Annabeth said. "Show them some more respect." The light-haired half-blood just stared at her before he sighed and shook his head. "They want my respect, they have to earn it," he said. Annabeth looked at him shocked. "Are you serious?" she asked, looking at him like he had gone insane. Naruto nodded. "Trust me when I say this, respect does not come easy from me, especially to those that are trying to kill me for no reason." Annabeth shook her head with a sigh. She could tell that arguing the matter would not help with anything. "Is there any that you do respect?" Naruto nodded. "Several," he said, keeping his eyes ahead of him. "Such as?" Naruto sighed in annoyance. "Such as, my father, Dionysus, Hermes, Hephaestus, and Aphrodite." Now Annabeth was curious. "Why those 5 gods? Why not the rest?" she asked. Naruto's brow started to twitch, but he answered nonetheless, because. He said, annoyance clear in his voice. 4 of them are family and Dionysus because he can actually pose as a challenge when we play cards. Now any more questions? Before Annabeth could reply, light started to filter through the trees ahead. His interest piqued. Naruto gestured for the others to follow him. Come on. With that he began to lead them to whatever the light was. He never knew what was happening in his mind at that very moment, or how it would affect his life. Mindscape. Thalia sighed as she sat at the edge of a pond and stared blankly ahead of herself. While to anyone else would think that she was just relaxing, those who knew her well enough could tell that she was at war with herself over something. That something? Naruto Uzumaki, and what it was she felt for him. She couldn't understand why her heart would jump with joy every time she saw or talked to him, why she felt her cheeks heat up whenever she thought of him, why she felt her heart breaking whenever she thought of how close he came to dying in his fight with Ares. Or why when he was around his fangirls, she felt an intense feeling of jealousy. Thalia just couldn't figure out why she felt the way she did. It couldn't be love, she thought, her eyes widening at the possibility, could it? But it can't be. We only met a week and a half ago. Thalia thought in turmoil. And why not? A more optimistic voice sounded inside her head. True, you two only met less than 2 weeks ago, but stranger things have happened. It stated. But I can't be in love with Naruto. Thalia thought back, true, he is nice, caring, protective, and his body looks so good that I just want to rub my hands all over it, and her thoughts trailed as they went down the drain and she began to drool, blood dripping from her nose. Head out of the gutter. The voice said amusedly, snapping Thalia out of her now moderated thoughts. What was I talking about again? Thalia asked, blushing up a storm when she realized where her mind had gone. Just something about how it wasn't possible for you to be in love with the blonde Adonis that saved you from that tree. The voice said, and Thalia could swear that it was smirking at her. Right. As I was saying, he is kind, caring, and would do anything to protect those he considers his friends and family. A real catch, I'll admit, but I barely know him. She thought. True, but you have plenty of time to get to know him. The voice said, causing Thalia to blush at the double meaning of those words, but said nothing. So the question is, do you love him or not? The voice asked. Thalia again blushed but looked down and sighed in defeat. Yeah, I do. She thought before she gained a sour look. But, he's already with Helena, and she's way better looking than I am. Why would he go for me when he has her? She thought sadly. I wouldn't be so negative, Thalia. The voice said, out loud, behind her. Thalia's eyes widened when she realized that it was Helena's voice she had been talking to. She turned to see Fox Girl leaning against a tree, her arms crossed and a sly smirk on her face. Thalia stared at her with a nervous grin on her face. Helena. She stuttered. Helena chuckled and shook her head at her. No need to be nervous, she said, walking over to Thalia and then sitting next to her. So you like Naruto-kun too? Helena stated, that sly smile still on her face. Thalia blushed at the accusation and looked away. You're lucky, Thalia whispered. How so? Thalia's eyes widened. She hadn't meant for Helena to hear that. She pulled her knees up to her face and wrapped her arms around them. Because you have someone that will care for and love you unconditionally. She said in a low voice, I wish I had someone like that. There was silence for a moment before. Yeah, I guess I am, Helena said happily, but in truth I don't deserve him. She said, her voice low and grim. Thalia gained a confused expression and looked over to Helena to see that the vixen had her head down and her hair was shadowing her eyes. What? You heard me. I don't deserve him. Especially after all the pain I've caused him, Helena said. But I love him and he loves me, she said, her voice becoming a little lighter. And I'll do anything to make him happy. But, Helena continued look up at Thalia, the grin back in place. I don't mind sharing, she said, causing Thalia's eyes to widen when she saw the vixen's face closer to hers. Her eyes widened even further when she felt said vixen's lips on her own. Thalia did nothing other than sit there in surprise for a few seconds, before her eyes started to become clouded and she began to move her own lips in sync with Helena's. Helena's eyes widened and she pulled away gaping at the dazed half-blood. My gods, she said in surprise, you're bi. Thalia blushed and looked away from the vixen. So what? You are too, she asked / said, taking a chance peek at Helena to see that she was now grinning mischievously. You and I will get along just fine, Helena said and tackled Thalia to the ground, their lips crashing together. With Naruto and the others. Auntie M's garden gnome emporium. Naruto asked confused, staring at the neon sign. Their surroundings were not what they had expected to find when the trees had cleared. The group was standing in front of an old roadside curio shop. One of the old ones that sold lawn flamingos, wooden Indians, cement grizzly bears and other things like that. The main building was a long, low warehouse, surrounded by acres of statuary. The entrance was flanked by 2 cement garden gnomes, ugly bearded little things, smiling and waving. On the opposite side of the road there was a closed-down gas station, and a tattered billboard for a 1990s movie. Percy sniffed the air, his stomach grumbling, and began to walk towards the smell of hamburgers and getting the others' attention. Hey! Grover warned. The lights are on inside, Annabeth said, beginning to walk forward too. Maybe it's open. I don't think that it's a good idea to go in there, Naruto said, not wanting to take any chances. Snack bar, Percy said wistfully. Snack bar, Annabeth agreed. Are you too crazy? Grover asked. Guys, something's not right. Naruto said he could feel something off about the statues. They ignored them. The front lot was a forest of statues, cement animals, cement children, and adults, even a cement satyr playing the reed pipes, that one gave Grover the creeps. Blah ha ha, he bleated. Looks like my Uncle Ferdinand. They stopped at the warehouse door. Don't knock, Grover pleaded. I smell monsters. Your nose is clogged up from the harpies, Annabeth told him. All I smell are burgers. Aren't you hungry? Meat, he said scornfully. In case you forgot, I'm a vegetarian. You eat cheese enchiladas in aluminum cans. Percy reminded him. But those are vegetables, Grover argued. Naruto, who had been looking around, turned back to the others. Come on guys. Let's leave. Those statues are starting to creep me out, he said. Percy snorted, drawing Naruto's attention to him. What? Before Percy could reply, the door creaked open. The door creaked open and revealed a Middle Eastern woman. They assumed that she was Middle Eastern because she wore a long black gown that covered everything but her old but well manicured, coffee-colored hands. Her head was completely veiled, so all they could make out was her eyes glinting behind a curtain of black gauze. Children, it is too late for you to be out all alone. Where are your parents? She asked with an accent that sounded vaguely Middle Eastern too. They're Annabeth started to say. We're orphans, Percy said. Orphans, the woman said, the word sounding alien in her mouth. But my dears. Surely not. We got separated from our caravan, Percy said. Our circus caravan. The ringmaster told us to meet him at the gas station if we got lost, but he may have forgotten, or maybe he meant a different gas station. Anyway, we're lost. Is that food I smell? The last part made Naruto and Grover sweat drop and resist the urge to facepalm. Oh, my dears, the woman said. You must come in, poor children. I am Auntie M. Go straight through to the back of the warehouse, please. There is a dining area. They thanked her and went inside. Circus caravan. Annabeth asked, turning to Percy. Always have a strategy, right? Your head is full of kelp. The warehouse was filled with even more statues, people in all sorts of poses, outfits, and even expressions. Something that Naruto and to a lesser extent Percy noticed was that they were all life-size. Odd, Naruto thought, a brow raised. Why are they all life-sized? Percy thought, before his stomach rumbled, driving anything other than the need to fill his gut out of his mind. Oh well, I need food. So distracted by the smell that was drafting from the back of the warehouse, Percy never noticed Grover's nervous whimpers, Naruto's suspicious glances around the building, or the way the statue's eyes seemed to follow them, or the fact that Auntie M had locked the doors behind them. All Percy cared about was finding the dining area and filling his stomach. Something he had noticed since he had gained access to his chakra was that his appetite had shot up. He thus needed more food than he had before. He just hoped that there was a place to eat like Auntie M had said. Sure enough, there it was at the back of the warehouse, a fast food counter with a grill, a soda fountain, a pretzel heater, and a nacho cheese dispenser. Everything a kid like Percy could want, plus a few steel picnic tables out front. Please, sit down, Auntie M said, gesturing to the tables. Awesome. Percy said. Grover said reluctantly, we don't have any money, ma'am. He lied, knowing full well that Naruto had their bags secured in a scroll, plus the extra Luke had given him strapped to his shoulders. Before Percy could jab him in the ribs, Auntie M waved her hands dismissively. No, no, children. No money. This is a special case, yes? It is my treat, for such nice orphans. Thank you, ma'am. Naruto and Annabeth said. Auntie M stiffened, as if they had done something wrong, but just as fast she relaxed, Percy figured that it was his imagination. Naruto though wasn't so quick to dismiss it. He knew there was something the old woman was hiding. He could feel her heated stares on both him and Annabeth every few moments. And if he wasn't mistaken, he could feel foulness to her chakra, though there wasn't much to feel. It was enough for him to be on edge and his eyes narrowed. Quiet, all right, Annabeth, Naruto, she said. You both have such beautiful eyes, children. Now I know something's off about this. Naruto thought, eyes narrowing further. We didn't give her our names. Their hostess disappeared behind the snack counter and stared, cooking. Before they knew it, she'd brought them plastic trays heaped with double cheeseburgers, vanilla shakes, and double extra large servings of fries. Percy immediately started to dig in. He was halfway through his burger before he remembered to breath. The others weren't so quick to follow his example. Annabeth slurped her shake. Grover picked at the fries and eyed the tray's wax lining as if he would go for that. Naruto didn't touch a thing. Naruto and Grover's ears twitched when they picked up on something the others didn't. What's that hissing sound? Grover asked. Naruto nodded to show he heard it too. Percy listened, but didn't hear anything. Annabeth shook her head. Hissing? Auntie M asked. Perhaps you two are hearing the deep fryer oil. You both have such keen ears. I take vitamins for my ears. My senses are naturally strong. That's admirable, she said. But please, relax. Auntie M ate nothing. She hadn't taken off her head dress, even to cook. All she did was sit forward and interlace her fingers and watched them eat. It was unsettling, to say the least, having someone staring at them when they couldn't see her face. But Percy was feeling too satisfied and sleepy to care, so he figured the least he could do was try to make some small talk with their hostess. So you sell gnomes? He asked, trying to sound interested. Oh, yes, Auntie M said. And animals. And people. Anything for the garden. Custom orders. Statuary is very popular, you know. Naruto's eyes narrowed again. She had said people a little too happily. It sent warning bells off in his head. He could feel the subtle effects of a genjutsu be cast, and he quickly gathered his chakra to dispel it, not enough to be noticeable, only enough to nullify it around him. He noticed that Grover and Annabeth didn't seem to be affected at all. But Percy was already under its influence. Naruto decided to play along. "A lot of business on the road?" he asked, propping his arms on the table to make it look like he was getting tired. Auntie M shook her head sadly. "Not so much, no. Since they built the highway, most cars, they do not go this way now. I must cherish every costumer I get." Naruto and Percy's necks tingled, as if somebody was looking at them. They turned, but all they saw was a statue of a young girl holding an Easter basket. The detail was incredible, much better than one would see in most garden statues. But something was wrong. The girl's face looked as if she was startled, terrified even. "Ah," Auntie M said. "You've noticed that some of my creations do not turn out so well. They are marred. They do not sell. The face is the hardest to get right. Always the face." While the explanation of the expression had been enough for Percy, Naruto continued to stare at it. The girl's eyes were alive and viewing the whole conversation. They were sending Naruto a message: "Get away. Get away now." His eyes widened when he realized who they were dealing with. But he had to play along until the opportunity to escape presented itself. "So you make statues yourself?" he asked, turning back to the one he now knew to be a monster. "Oh, yes. Once upon a time I had 2 sisters to help me in the business, but they have long since passed on. I have only my statues. This is why I make them. They are my company." The deep sadness in her voice had Percy feeling sorry for her, and even Naruto could feel his heart going out for her, but he wasn't going to let her fool him. Annabeth had stopped eating. She sat forward with a curious expression and asked, "2 sisters?" Naruto felt a small amount of relief in his chest. She was starting to figure it out. "It's a terrible story," Auntie M said. "Not one for children, really. You see, Annabeth, some bad people were jealous of me, long ago, when I was young. I had a boyfriend, you know, and these bad people, a man and a woman, were determined to break us apart. They caused a terrible accident. My sisters stayed by me. They shared in my bad fortune as long as they could, but eventually they passed on. They faded away. I alone have survived, but at a price. Such a price." Percy wasn't sure what she meant, but he felt bad for her. His eyelids were getting heavier. He didn't know it, but he was fully under the influence of her genjutsu. Something Naruto noticed, and was berating himself over. How could I have forgotten to teach him how to detect illusions, he thought, resisting the urge to bang his face against the table. However, he noticed the girls in his head were silent, being caught up in other activities. He pushed that out of his head and turned back to the rest of the table when he felt Annabeth tugging on his and Percy's shirt sleeves. "Guys," she said, looking worried. "Maybe we should go. I mean, the ring master will be waiting." Percy wasn't sure why she sounded so tense. Grover really was eating the waxed paper now. If Auntie M found that strange, she wasn't saying anything. Naruto nodded to Annabeth's words. "Such beautiful blue and gray eyes," Auntie M told the 2 blondes. "My, yes, it has been a long time since I saw eyes like those." She reached out to touch Naruto's masked cheek, but he stood up abruptly, Annabeth following his example. "Come on guys," Naruto said. "We really need to get going." "Yes." Grover swallowed his wax paper and stood up. "The ring master is waiting." Percy didn't want to leave. He felt full and content. Auntie M was so nice. He wanted to stay with her a while longer. What he didn't know was that what he was feeling were the effects of a sleeping genjutsu. "Please, dears," Auntie M pleaded. "I so rarely get to be with children. Before you go, won't you at least sit for a pose?" "A pose?" Naruto asked, alarm bells sounding in his head. "A photograph. I will use it to model a new statue set. Children are so popular, you see. Everyone loves children." Annabeth shifted her weight from foot to foot, while Naruto shook his head. "I don't think we can, ma'am." "Come on, Percy dash." "Sure we can," Percy said. He was irritated at how Naruto and Annabeth were being so bossy, so rude to an old lady who had fed them for free. "It's just a photo, guys," he said. "What's the harm?" "Yes," the woman purred. "No harm." Percy could tell that neither of them liked it, but they allowed Auntie M to lead them back out the front door and into the garden of statues. She directed them to a park bench next to the stone satyr. "Now," she said, "I'll just position you correctly. The young girl in the middle, I think, Percy and Grover on either side and Naruto standing behind them." "Not much light for a photo," Naruto remarked, starting to ready himself. "Oh, enough," Auntie M said. "Enough for us to see each other, yes." "Where's your camera?" Grover asked. Auntie M stepped back, as if to admire the shot. "Now, the face is the most difficult. Can you each smile for me please, everyone?" A large smile. Grover glanced at the cement satyr next to him, and mumbled, "That sure does look like Uncle Ferdinand." "Grover," Auntie M chastised, "look this way, dear." She turned her attention to Naruto. "Naruto, dear, could you remove your mask? I want to see your smile." She still had no camera in her hands. Percy-Annabeth and Naruto said. Some instinct was warning Percy to listen to them, but he was feeling the sleepy feeling, the comfortable lull, that strangely reminded him of the one genjutsu that Naruto had ever used on him. Wait, genjutsu. Percy thought, his mind beginning to work again. He began to think about all the statues he saw around the garden, how many people looked as if they had been frightened when they were carved, what little bit Naruto had taught him about detecting chakra, and Auntie M. Auntie M. How could I be so stupid? He berated himself, slowly bringing his hands together to form the tiger seal. Naruto noticed what Percy was doing and he smirked to himself. Finally, he's figured it out. While all this had been going on, Auntie M had started to reach for her veil. "I'll just be a moment, I can't see very well in this cursed veil." "Guys, something's wrong," Annabeth insisted. She didn't notice Percy moving his arms, or Naruto stiffening ever so slightly. She kept her eyes trained on the monster in front of her. "Wrong," Auntie M said, gripping the edges of her veil. "Not at all, dear. I have such noble company tonight. What could be wrong?" Auntie M's chakra levels began to skyrocket as she started to bring her veil down. Several things happened at once right then. "That is Uncle Ferdinand," Grover gasped. "Look away from her," Annabeth shouted, whipping her Yankees cap onto her head and vanishing. Her invisible hands pushed Percy and Grover away, while Naruto jumped away from the group. "Release," Percy thought, pulsing his chakra around him, breaking Medusa's hold on him as Annabeth pushed him off the bench. He immediately sprang to his feet and rushed behind a statue. He heard Grover scrambling off in the opposite direction, and Annabeth in another. Naruto was most likely coming up with a plan. Percy could hear rasping coming from the area he had just vacated. It was the sound of snakes. He chanced to peek around the statue, keeping his eyes trained on the ground. He froze when his eyes rose from her sandaled feet. Her hands had gone from their chocolate-brown complexion to pale, warty and gnarled. Her once well-manicured fingernails had turned into sharp bronze talons. He heard more rasping, coming from right where her head would be. Medusa seemed to have noticed Percy looking at her from behind the statue, because she said, "Stay with me, Percy. All you have to do is look up." Her voice was soothing, it sounded nothing like what a monster should. Medusa's voice invited him to look up, to sympathize with a poor old grandmother. Percy knew she was trying to get him back into the genjutsu, and fought the urge to obey. Instead he looked lower, and stared into one of those crystal ball things people put in their gardens, that was laying at her feet. What he saw of Medusa's dark reflection in the orange glass was that her head dress was gone, it revealed her face as a shimmering pale circle. Her hair was moving, writhing together like serpents. Percy's eyes widened again and he immediately hid behind the statue again. His head began to flash through the myth of how Medusa had originally died. He remembered that Medusa and her sisters had been asleep when his namesake, Perseus, had attacked them. But she was nowhere near asleep now, and if she really wanted, she could rip his face open with her talons. "The blue and gray-eyed ones did this to me, Percy," Medusa said. "Annabeth's mother and Naruto's ancestor, the cursed Athena and that damned sage of 6 paths, turned me from a beautiful woman into this." "Don't listen to her," Naruto's voice shouted somewhere off to Percy's right. "Run, Percy," Annabeth's own shouted from somewhere in the statuary. Silence. Medusa snared. Then her voice turned back into the soothing purr. "You see why I must destroy them, Percy. They are my enemies' decadents. I will crush their statues to dust. But you, dear Percy, you need not suffer." "No," Percy said, darting away from the statue he was hiding behind to the next, just as Medusa's claws pierced through it. It seems that Medusa had been getting closer to Percy's hiding place as she spoke. Medusa chuckled as Percy ran from her. "Do you really want to help the gods?" she asked. "Do you understand what awaits you on this foolish quest, Percy? What will happen if you battle the turned god? Do not be a pawn of the Olympians, my dear. You would be better off as a statue. Less pain. Less pain." "Yeah, well, you can tell that to my father when you meet him." Naruto's voice shouted. He became visible behind Medusa. A black headband over his eyes, and his sword heading for her back. Medusa growled as she dodged. She turned to face the blonde half-blood and froze when she saw his sword. How did you get that sword?" she asked, now backing away in fear. Naruto quirked a brow visible over his blindfold and said/asked, "Okay, you're the 4th monster to be scared of my blade today. Just what the hell about it makes you monsters so damn afraid of it?" Naruto, behind them came a buzzing sound, like a 200-pound hummingbird in a nosedive. "Duck." Percy glanced from his hiding place just in time to see Naruto dive out of the way of Grover, who had a tree branch the size of a baseball bat held high above his head, eyes shut tight, and his head twitching from side to side. The satyr delivered a hard swing to Medusa's head. Thwack. Medusa roared in rage. "You miserable little satyr," she snarled. "I'll add you to my collection." "That was for Uncle Ferdinand," Grover shouted back, swooping in for another pass. Kerwhack. "Arg!" Medusa yelled, the snakes that were her hair hissing and spitting at the flying goat boy. Right next to Percy 2 voices said, "Percy." He jumped so high that his feet cleared a garden gnome. "Geez guys. Don't do that." Naruto and Annabeth took of their items and materialized next to him. "Someone has to cut her head off," Annabeth said. "What? Are you crazy? What we need to do is get out of here," Percy said before he turned to Naruto. "Weren't you fighting her?" he asked. Naruto stared at him blankly before he pointed back to the fight. Percy looked and saw that there was another Naruto fighting Medusa as Grover battered her over the head with his makeshift bat. Percy's sweat dropped as he turned back to the other 2, Shadow Clone. He muttered. "Should have known." "Either way, Percy," Annabeth said. "Medusa is a menace. She's evil. I'd kill her myself, but she swallowed, as if she was about to make a difficult admission. Naruto, seeing her uncomfortable, spoke up, the point is we can't get close to her. Without a distraction she'd slice us to bits, as you can see with my clone. He said. They looked up to the fight just in time to see the clone get sliced to ribbons. But, Naruto continued, you've got a chance to get close and distract her. What? But I can't dash. Do you want her turning more innocent people into stone? Annabeth asked, pointing to a pair of statue lovers, a man and a woman with their arms wrapped around each other, turned to stone by the monster. Annabeth grabbed a green gazing ball from a nearby pedestal and inspected it with a critical eye. A polished shield would be better, she said, holding it up to eyes level. The convexity will cause some distortion. The reflection's size should be off by a factor of dash. As she continued to ramble on about how the ball would distort the image, Naruto and Percy turned to each other with questioning gazes. They both shrugged. Neither of them knew what she was talking about. Would you speak English? Percy asked, his eyebrow twitching. Annabeth turned back to him with a glare. I am. She tossed him the glass ball. Just look at her in the glass. Never, and I repeat, never look at her directly. There was another wood hitting against flesh sound to signify that Grover had hit his mark again, and momentary silence before Grover spoke. Hey, guys, he yelled somewhere above them, I think she's unconscious. Again momentary silence before, Ruoar. Maybe not, Grover corrected, going in for another swing with the branch. We need to hurry, Naruto said. Grover's got a hell of a nose, but he'll crash eventually. Percy gulped but nodded. He took out his pin and uncapped it. The bronze blade of Riptide elongated in his hand. What about you? He asked. Naruto smirked and brought out the headband his clone had been using as a blindfold. If I cover my eyes with this and use the Rinnegan, I'll be able to see her chakra signature, he said. Percy and Annabeth looked at him weirdly. But won't you turn to stone? Percy asked. Naruto shook his head. Nope. You only get turned to stone if you look at her face. The Rinnegan allows me to see the chakra of living things to some degree. So if I'm only looking at her chakra, then I can't get turned to stone. He explained with a small smirk. All you need to do is keep her distracted long enough so that I can get behind her and send her to the underworld. The other two nodded, and Percy walked out from behind the statue. Albeit nervously. He followed the hissing and spitting noises of Medusa's hair, keeping his eyes locked on the gazing ball so that he would only glimpse her reflection and not the real thing. It was then, in the green-tinted glass, that he saw her. Grover was coming in for another turn at the batting plate, but this time he flew a little too low. Medusa was able to grab the stick and pull him off course, causing him to tumble through the air and crash into the arms of a stone grizzly bear with a painful umph. Medusa looked like she was about to lunge at him when Percy yelled, "Hey!" As Medusa turned to him, Percy advanced on her, something that wasn't easy, holding a sword and a glass ball. If she decided to charge him, he'd have a hard time defending himself. But Medusa let him approach 20 feet, 10 feet. He could see the reflection of her face becoming clearer with every step. Surely she couldn't be that ugly. Maybe the green swirls of the gazing ball were distorting the image to make it look worse than it really was. You wouldn't harm an old woman, Percy, Medusa crooned. I know you wouldn't. Percy hesitated, fascinated by the face he saw reflecting in the glass, the eyes that seemed to glow and burn straight through the green-tinted paint. They made his arms go weak. Maybe he can't. A voice said directly behind the monster. But I can. There was a flash of metal, and a sickening schlock. With a hiss like wind rushing out of a cavern, that signaled a monster being dispelled, Percy felt something land on the ground beside his feet. It took all his willpower not to look down when he felt something warm oozing into his sock, and the little dying snake heads tugging at his shoelaces. Percy looked away from the ball to see Naruto standing where Medusa had previously been. His form was soaked in Medusa's green blood. "Oh, yuck," Grover said. His eyes still tightly closed. Percy guessed that he could still hear the thing at his feet gurgling and steaming. Mega yuck. Annabeth came up to them, her eyes fixed on the sky. She was holding Medusa's black veil. "Don't move," she said. Very, very carefully, and without looking, Annabeth bent down and wrapped the monster's head in the black cloth, then picked it up. "Grouse," Percy said, looking at the bundle that was dripping green juice. He looked down to look at his feet and groaned. "Come on. These are the only pair I have with me." Naruto snorted at him, and took his blind off. "You think that's bad?" he asked. "Try being covered in the stuff," he said, causing Percy to shudder. "No thanks. I'm good." Percy looked back at the bundle in Annabeth's hands. Why didn't the head evaporate?" he asked, feeling like throwing up his burger. "Once you sever it, it becomes a spoil of war," Annabeth explained in a somewhat trembling voice. "It's the same as the Minotaur horns. But don't unwrap it. It can still petrify you." Grover moaned as H climbed down the grisly statue. He had a big welt on his forehead, his green Rasta cap was hanging from one of his little goat horns, and his fake feet had been knocked off his hooves. The sneakers were flying aimlessly around his head. Naruto smirked at him. "The Red Baron," he said. "Good job, man." Grover managed a bashful but yet pained grin. "That really was not fun, though. Well, the hitting her with a stick part was. But the crashing into a concrete bear? Not fun," he said, scratching his nose. Naruto nodded to him with a grin. "Yeah, there's no better stress reliever than hitting a monster over the head with a stick, when you're flying over them," he said mischievously as Grover snatched his shoes out of the air. After that the group stumbled back into the warehouse. They found some old grocery bags behind the snack counter and double-wrapped Medusa's head. They plopped it on the table where they'd eaten and sat around it, too exhausted to speak. Finally Percy said, "So we have Athena and whoever this sage guy was to thank for this monster." The last part was directed at Naruto. Annabeth flashed him an irritated look. "Your dad actually. Don't you remember? Medusa was Poseidon's girlfriend. They decided to meet in my mother's temple. That's why Athena turned her into a monster. And she's apparently still sweet on your dad. That's why she was willing to preserve you. Though I have no idea who this Sage of Six Paths is." The others turned to Naruto for an explanation. The blonde sighed. "The Sage of Six Paths, or in my language, Rakudo Sennin." He started, getting nods from the others. "Well, in my world he is viewed as the one who discovered chakra, and thus founded the arts of ninjutsu and created the ninja world. But before that he was just a simple priest, wanting nothing but peace for the world. It was long before the Trojan War or any other major event in Greek mythology, and a terrible monster was bringing horror and mass destruction to the world." Naruto paused to think of how to explain the rest. He knew the story by heart, having read the original myth in the Uzumaki scrolls and the real version in his father's. The beast was called the Juabi or the Ten-Tails. But anyway, the beast was so powerful that even the gods were reluctant to face it. They couldn't face it alone and they knew it. They needed a new type of hero, a hero with abilities never before seen, a hero whose abilities could match that of their own. And so they chose a simple priest, and each god blessed him with a portion of their power. Now not every god was willing to give him a portion of their power. And they tested him. He stopped with a pointed look to Annabeth, who got the message. That's why Medusa said that there were two people who cursed her. She realized. My mother was testing the sage. Naruto nodded to her. Yes, that's the reason, he said. But Percy was now entranced by the story. What happened next? he asked. Naruto sighed and began again. After he had been proven worthy, the gods gave him a time frame to train in his new abilities. And it was in this time that he discovered that the body's energy could be used to do incredible feats. He had discovered chakra, a power that not even the gods knew about. Everyone's eyes widened. And so it was with this new power combined with those of the gods that formed something that would one day become legendary, even among those of Olympus. He had developed the Rinnegan. Naruto couldn't help but smirk at their gaping faces. He chuckled and continued. When his training time had finished, he faced the Ten Tails. The sage and the beast battled for days. They leveled mountains, created several of the craters that are still found around the world today. But even with the power of chakra and those of the gods, the sage found himself on the losing end of the fight, and he was forced to come up with a new way to stop the beast. The others were hanging on Naruto's every word. And come up with a new way indeed. And it was with the last of his chakra that he came up with the greatest and most difficult art that any ninja can hope to learn. He came up with Fuinjutsu, the art of sealing. It was with this art that he was able to stop this beast by sealing it inside of himself. Thus he became the first demon vessel. The first Jinchuriki, if you will. The other's eyes were so wide they could have popped out. He sealed it into himself. Annabeth stuttered. Naruto nodded to her. What happened next? Percy asked. Naruto again smirked, but continued with the end of his little history lesson. After he had stopped the beast, the sage presented himself to the gods. The gods, who were shocked by how much damage the battle had done to the earth, could not let a deed like that go unrewarded. They gave the sage the option to choose what he wanted. They were surprised by what he asked for. Instead of immortality or a seat on Olympus like they believed he wanted, all the sage asked for was that he could be able to teach those who wanted to learn about chakra. Stunned by his heartfelt request, the gods gave him what he asked for, but with a condition. Condition? Grover asked. Naruto nodded. The condition was that while he could pass on his abilities to any he wanted, the sage had to do it in a different realm. But that's Percy tried, but Naruto held his hand up to stop him. I know what you're going to say, Percy, but if you would just let me finish you'll understand why. He said, a small glare directed at his friend. Percy nodded to him and Naruto again continued. When asked why, the gods explained a prophecy to him. Naruto said, I don't know what it was about, but either way the sage agreed. And so it was with that decision that the gods created a realm identical to that of the original, but over time it would change to be almost the exact opposite of the original. And while the gods created this new realm, the sage traveled the world gathering followers, to learn the ways of chakra. And so after a year of traveling the world, the sage led his numerous disciples into this new world that would one day become the realm of the shinobi. After finishing his story, Naruto gazed at his gaping friends, his smirk almost visible through his mask. Well, you've got your explanation on the sage, he said, snapping them out of their stunned state. But what are we going to do with that? He asked, pointing to the bagged head of Medusa. They stared at the thing for several moments. As he stared at a snake head, Percy realized that he was angry at the gods for the quests, for getting them blown off the road and into two major fights on the first day out of camp. At this rate we'll never be able to find the helm or the bolt, much less make it to LA alive before the solstice. He thought. He thought about what Medusa had said, do not be a pawn of the Olympians, my dear. You would be better off as a statue. He got up, I'll be back. Percy, Annabeth called after him. What are you ? She didn't get to finish as the door to Medusa's office slammed shut behind him. Percy searched through said office, and found the account book. It showed Medusa's most recent sales were all to the underworld to decorate Persephone's garden. They were shipped to the address of a DOA Recording Studios, West Hollywood, California. Percy stuffed the slip of paper into his pocket and searched the cash register. Inside he found $20, a few drachmas, and some packing slips for Hermes' overnight express, each with a leather pouch attached for coins. He rummaged around the rest of the office until he found the right-sized box. He went back to the picnic table, packed up Medusa's head, and filled out a delivery slip. But before he poured any drachmas into the pouch, he handed the delivery slip to Naruto, who after reading it smirked and scribbled something onto it. It read: "The Gods, Mount Olympus, 600th floor, Empire State Building, New York, New York, with best wishes, Percy Jackson and Naruto Uzumaki. P.S. Nice try with the harpies, Bolt's breath." After reading it, Annabeth and Grover shared a worried look. "They're not going to like that," Grover warned. "They'll think you guys are impertinent." Percy filled the pouch with drachmas. As soon as he closed it, the box floated off the table and disappeared with the sound of a cash register. "We are impertinent," Naruto said, his eyebrow twitching. They both looked to Annabeth, daring her to criticize. Thankfully she didn't, seemingly resigned to the fact that the two boys had a major talent for ticking off the gods. "Come on," she muttered. "We need a new plan." Underworld. The ones watching what was going on only stared stunned at what Naruto and Percy had done. There was silence for a moment before they burst out laughing. "I am so going to bring that nickname up at the next Council of the Gods. Just to annoy Zeus," Hades said, bent over and holding his gut. Yahiko and Kushina could do nothing but laugh. Olympus. The entirety of the throne room could only stare at the box Hermes had just delivered to Zeus. They were all waiting for his reaction to the insult. However, 3 others were just barely hold back their laughter as they stared at the Lord of the Sky. "Good one," they thought to their grandson. Meanwhile, the said Sky Lord was just staring at the box with a twitching brow. Bolt's breath. They were pretty miserable that night. They camped out in the woods, a few hundred yards from the main road, in a marshy clearing that local kids had obviously used for parties. The ground was littered with flattened soda cans and fast food wrappers. They had taken some more supplies from Auntie M's, mostly some more food and blankets, but they didn't dare light a fire. Yes, Naruto could cast a genjutsu to cover their tracks, but the harpies and Medusa had provided enough excitement for one day, and they didn't want to attract any more monsters with the chakra usage. They decided to sleep in shifts. 2 would sleep while the other 2 would take watch. Naruto and Percy took the first shift. Annabeth curled up on the blankets and was snoring as soon as her head hit the ground. Grover fluttered to the lowest bough of a tree, put his back to the trunk and stared at the night sky. "You go ahead and sleep, Grover," Naruto told him. "We'll wake you if there's any trouble." He nodded, but his eyes remained open. "It makes me sad, guys." Naruto and Percy exchanged confused looks. "What does?" "The fact that you signed up for these stupid quests," Percy asked. "No. This makes me sad." He pointed to all the garbage around the clearing. "And the sky. You can't even see the stars. They've polluted the sky. This is a terrible time to be a sadder." "Oh, yeah," Percy said. "I guess you'd be an environmentalist." Grover glared at him. "Only a human wouldn't. Your species is clogging up the world so fast. Never mind. It's useless to lecture a human, much less 2. At the rate things are going, I'll never find Pan." "Pam. Pam. Pam," Percy asked. "Like the cooking spray?" Naruto shook his head with a sigh that got the pair's attention. "It's said as Pan, Percy. Pan. The god Pan," he said, and looked to a shocked Grover. "He's the reason you want a searcher's license, isn't he?" A strange breeze rustled through the dark clearing. It temporarily overpowered the stink of trash and muck. It brought the smell of berries and wildflowers and clean rain water, the things that had once been those woods. Grover nodded to Naruto, a questioning gaze on his face. Yeah. But how do you know about Pan? Naruto shook his head. I did a lot of research on the Greek gods after I came to this world. While there wasn't a lot about him, I still got the gist of what the stories said about Pan. He leaned against a tree and looked to the sky. To be honest with you, Grover, I agree. With all of the pollution around the world, it's a terrible time for a satyr. The other two stayed silent for a few moments before Percy asked, Who's Pan? And why do you want to search for him? Grover looked at him cautiously. Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds and nature. He disappeared 2,000 years ago, he told the listeners. It's said that a sailor off the coast of Ephesus heard a mysterious voice crying out from the shore. It said, Tell them that the great god Pan has died, and when the humans heard the news, they believed it. And since then they've been pillaging Pan's kingdom ever since. But for the satyrs, Pan was our lord and master. He protected us and the wild places of the earth. We refuse to believe that he died. In every generation the bravest of satyrs pledge their lives to finding Pan. They search the earth, exploring all the wildest places, hoping to find where he is hidden, and wake him from his sleep. And you want to be a searcher? It's my life's dream. Grover said, with a proud nod. My father was a searcher. And my uncle Ferdinand, the statue you saw back there, right, sorry. Grover shook his head. He knew the risks. So did my dad. But I'll succeed. I'll be the first to return alive. Their eyes widened. Hang on the first. Naruto said, shocked. Grover took his reed pipes from his pocket. No searcher has ever come back. Once they set out, they disappear. They're never seen alive again. Not once. Naruto asked. In 2,000 years? No. And your dad? Percy asked. You have no idea what happened to him. None. But you still want to go, Percy said, amazed. I mean, you really think you'll be the one to find Pan? I have to believe that, Percy. Every searcher does. It's the only thing that keeps us going into despair when we look at what the humans have done to the world. I have to believe that Pan can still be found. They stared at the orange haze of the sky for several moments after that. Percy was trying to understand how Grover could pursue a dream like that. It seemed so hopeless. But then again, a voice rang in his head. Are you any better? Naruto, however, could understand what Grover's dream meant to the young satyr. After all, he had a similar goal. You know, Percy, Grover said. Back at Medusa's when you were searching her office? Annabeth pointed something out. What was it? Something strange happened on the bus, and then again when Naruto's clone was facing her. There's something off about that blade of yours, Naruto. Naruto nodded to him. Yeah, I know. He said. But just what about it makes monsters cower when they see even the hilt? The others shook their heads. I don't know, Grover said. But you've got to admit that it is weird. How they reacted, I mean. Again Naruto nodded. I know, but Dad never said anything about the sword when I opened the scroll it was in. Grover gazed down from his branch, staring at the two half-bloods for a while before he turned back to the sky. How about I take first watch? You two get some sleep. They wanted to protest, but when he started to play his pipes, a soft and sweet tone, their eyes began to feel heavy. After a few more bars they were asleep. Percy to another nightmare and Naruto into his mindscape, where he would get the surprise of his life. As soon as Naruto found himself in the mindscape, he heard something that made him confused, moaning. He followed the sounds, until he reached an open space next to a small pond and he froze, and he felt his pants tighten upon seeing what was before him. Thalia, naked as the day she was born, was pinned down by a tail on each limb. Another tail was rubbing her puckered nether lips. Following the tails, what he saw made him even harder than he already was. Because straddling Thalia's waist and groping her still developing C-cup breasts, and having a tongue war with the one pinned under her was an equally naked Helena. Her other tails were rubbing the two of them sensually. All Naruto could do was stare at the sight before him, with a blush that could put a tomato to shame, and blood dripping from his nose. That is until he heard a muffled scream of pleasure and realized that Thalia had just come. Looking over from their positions on the ground, the two girls saw Naruto standing there frozen to his spot, and smirked to themselves. Looking to the one on top of her, Thalia sent a silent message. Helena responded with a nod and their smirks grew predatory. Helena looked back at the still staring Naruto, and ever so slowly got off of Thalia. She made her movements deliberately slow and made sure that he got a good view of her naked body. She smirked again as she saw Naruto's eyes trail over her form hungrily before locking onto her D-cups. When Helena had gotten off of her, Thalia sat up and they both raised their hands and sensually made the come here signal with their index fingers. Naruto could do nothing as his body reacted on its own and walked over to the two girls. Once he was there, the girls took one look at each other and then tackled him to the ground and pinned him under them. The next thing he knew was that his mask and shirt had been removed and he was in a fierce three-way tongue duel with Thalia and Helena. They kept at it as their hands began to explore each other's bodies. Both the girls moaned as Naruto's hands began to massage one of their breasts. They pulled back for air, and Naruto took the chance to latch his mouth to one of Thalia's breasts, and began to lick and nibble on the sensitive flesh. Naruto-kun, Thalia moaned in pleasure, loving the feeling his tongue was giving to her. Naruto smirked into her flesh when he heard her moaning out his name and began to swirl his tongue over the sensitive area around her nipple. Thalia couldn't believe the pleasure that she was getting as Naruto sucked her nipple and swirled his tongue around the hardened bud. She was moaning his name every few seconds. When he switched to her other breast, her moans were heightened. Pretty soon she could feel her end approaching fast, signified by the knot in her stomach that was getting tighter and tighter. Naruto could tell that she was getting close and stopped, much to the girl's disappointment, but the groan she let out to tell him such was changed into a loud pleasure-filled scream as one of Naruto's fingers was thrust into her nether lips. Now she was moaning uncontrollably, and those were only increased when Naruto added a second and picked up the pace. Naruto felt the walls of her opening trying to pull his fingers in deeper. The muscles were starting to tighten around them and he knew her release was about to happen. So he added another finger to and began to suck on her left nipple, while his unoccupied hand started to knead her other breast. Thalia was on cloud 9 with the amount of pleasure that was being given to her, and when her release hit, she yelled out in unbearable pleasure, "Naruto-kun," and her pussy gushed her love juices onto his fingers. When Thalia came, her walls had clamped down on his fingers so tight that Naruto had almost lost feeling in them, and said walls had become searing hot. She slumped against him, panting up a storm as she came off her orgasmic high, but she had a small happy smile on her face as she rested her head against his shoulder. She looked up to him when she felt him moving and blushed at what she saw. Naruto had brought his hand up to his nose and had begun to sniff at his fingers. As he did so, Naruto was intoxicated by her scent. "You smell heavenly, Thalia." Her blush reddened when he said that, and watched as he began to lick them clean. Naruto discovered that Thalia tasted better than anything he had ever tasted before, ramen included. And you taste just as heavenly too," he said as he finished the first and moved to the second. Thalia blushed even more as she saw him licking up her juices. As Naruto finished with the second finger and was about to move to the third, a hand reached out from behind them, drawing their attention and simultaneously turning them to Helena. Said Vixen brought his hand to her own mouth and began to clean the last digit. All the other two could do was stare. Both of them becoming even more turned on as they watched. Helena smirked as she cleaned Naruto's finger when she saw them staring. "I have to agree with you, Naruto-kun. Thalia-chan tastes good," she said, drawing out the last word for added affect. "But I think it's my turn," she said, as she began to lean back, and spread her legs so they could see her pussy, drenched with her own sex juices. Helena brought a hand to it and spread the folds so they could see the pink muscles on the inside. "Please, Naruto-kun, pleasure me," she said, looking at him lustfully. Naruto smirked as he moved Thalia off of him. "Of course, my Vixenheim," he whispered, leaning his face down. As his face became level with Helena's pussy, Naruto could smell her arousal. It was driving him crazy. He gave it a tentative lick. Helena gasped when he did so. It had sent waves of indescribable pleasure through her. Naruto smirked to himself when he heard her and began to lick her folds continuously. Helena began to moan out in pleasure as he did so, and her legs wrapped themselves around his head, pushing him against her crotch. Naruto's tongue spread her outer lips and began to explore her insides. He found the taste to be just as appealing as Thalia's. Thalia found herself staring at what was happening before her with wide eyes and a blush. She wished Naruto had done that to her. She found herself becoming hornier and hornier as she watched and gained a mischievous glint in her eye. And she crawled over to the two. Helena was moaning uncontrollably, loving the feeling the Naruto's tongue was giving her. She was surprised when she found herself staring at a wet and puckered pussy. She gained a small smirk when she realized what Thalia wanted her to do, and began to lick and suck on the girl's womanhood. Thalia began to moan out again when she felt the fox girl's tongue go to work. This was a whole new level of pleasure that she had never experienced before. Helena's own moans from Naruto ministrations added to the effect, and it wasn't long before she felt her second orgasm coming. Helena wasn't that far behind her. She could feel the knot building in her stomach. She got a naughty idea and smirked into Thalia's pussy. She began to move her tails. Thalia's eyes widened when she felt Helena's tails rub against her body. She gasped as they began to massage her breasts, rubbing against the nipples. She moaned again as they did this, and moved lower on her body. They swirled around her stomach, tickling the smooth skin. A single tail moved lower and around to her back. It began to rub against her soft and plump rear. Thalia moaned, her release was getting so close. Then it happened. The tail that had been rubbing her ass suddenly plunged into her rear and began to thrust into her. The sudden intrusions mixed with the vibrations of Helena's moans caused her to climax. Helena was right behind her, as Naruto had suddenly remembered something from the Ika books he read. He started to lick his vixen's clit, sending his tongue under the hood and probed the sensitive knob. That did it for her, and she came the same time Thalia did. Both the girls yelled out, Thalia's pussy flooding Helena's mouth and face with her juices, and Helena as her loins tightened and her legs' grip on Naruto's head became vice-like. Her tails went stiff, inadvertently prolonging Thalia's orgasm because the tail she had in her rear had hit a really sensitive spot, and her pussy flooded her sex juices. Naruto tried to lap all of Helena's up, but some of the fluid got on his face. When he was about to swallow his mouth full, Naruto was pulled up into a kiss with Thalia, and before he knew it her tongue had stolen a portion of what was in his mouth. After Helena had started to come down from her high, she looked to see that Thalia and Naruto were kissing, and she could see some of her own juices being stolen from his mouth. When she pulled back, Thalia tasted her stolen drink and swirled it around in her mouth. She moaned, swallowing it. You taste good, Lena-chan, she said, looking over her shoulder seductively. She watched as Helena looked at her, and began to clean her own face free of Thalia's juices. As do you, Leah-chan, the vixen said back, meeting the dark-haired girl's eyes. The two girls stared at one another, before they nodded, and their eyes gained a devious gleam. Before he knew it, Naruto was once again tackled to the ground, and was in a fierce tongue duel with Helena. Her breasts were being pushed up against his chest. But unlike before, Naruto felt a pair of soft hands trail down his chest and rest on the bulge in his pants. Naruto moaned into Helena's mouth as the hands grasped his member through the fabric, and Thalia's husky voice whispered in his ear. Oh, Naruto-kun, you feel like you could use some relief, as well? She breathed, and her hands began to fumble with his belt buckle. Naruto's eyes widened when both his pants and boxers were ripped off after Thalia had unclasped his belt, and her soft hands began to gently stroke his thick shaft. Thalia blushed when she got a clear view of Naruto's cock. So big, she thought. He has to be 7 inches at the very least. She began to stroke him, and found great satisfaction when she heard him groan, happy that she could get that reaction out of him. Naruto began to push Helena away from him, but she instead pushed herself harder against him and practically shoved her tongue down his throat. Wait, Thalia-chan. Okami. He tried to get out but couldn't due to a mixture of Helena still tongue wrestling with him, and pleasure at Thalia's ministrations. As Thalia was stroking his cock, Naruto was moaning into Helena's mouth. Thalia smirked as she kept him distracted and leaned her head down to get a closer look at the meat pole in front of her. She could see every vein that bulged during every pulse. She blushed as an idea came to her, and she licked Naruto's member from the very bottom of the shaft up to the head, moaning as she did so. She found that she liked his taste. Naruto groaned, and his cock twitched when she licked him. The pleasure that had coursed through his body was indescribable. Thalia heard him and smirked, and instead of licking him again, began to take him into her mouth. She stopped at the head and began to suck on it. Naruto groaned and pushed Helena back. The amount of pleasure that Thalia was giving him was almost unbearable. Thalia, that feels incredible. He groaned out. Thalia blushed at his praise, and started to take more of him in. It didn't take long before she had taken him into her mouth completely. She began to bob her head while she swirled her tongue around his cock, licking it and sucking it every time her head went up and down. Naruto was now moaning uncontrollably, and he began to feel his release building. I am gonna see come, he warned, and Thalia picked up her pace, eager to taste his seed. Helena smirked to herself. She got off of Naruto's chest and crawled down to where Thalia was and began to help her. Every time Thalia bobbed her head, Helena would run her tongue up and down his length. Now the pleasure Naruto felt was multiplied tenfold, and he cried out his orgasm, AHH, and he exploded into Thalia's mouth. When Naruto had come, Thalia had tried to get all of his thick, ropey semen to fit in her mouth, but there was too much of it, and some of it dribbled off her chin as she pulled away. She swirled the thick batter around in her mouth, tasting it, memorizing the flavor, a little bitter and salty, but it's not half bad, she thought. She made a show of swallowing the load. Yummy, she said, using her fingers to clean her face of his semen. Helena grabbed her hand as Thalia moved to lick her fingers clean, and cleaned them for her. MMMM. She groaned as she orally assaulted Thalia's digits, so good. When Naruto saw this happening, his member stiffened again. The girls saw this and once again smirked to each other, and nodded. Thalia crawled on top of Naruto, and positioned her leaking pussy above his cock. Naruto was surprised by her actions, and just as she was beginning to lower herself, he stopped her. Thalia looked at him with a frown, wondering why he stopped her. Did he not find her appealing? Was she not good enough for him? Were a few of the thoughts that ran through her head. But what she saw in his eyes was not any of the emotions that would confirm those thoughts. What she saw was pure concern and confusion. Are you sure you want this, Thalia? Naruto asked, his voice low. If we do this now, there's no turning back. Thalia nodded to him, a small smile on her face. Yes, Naruto-kun, I'm sure, she said. Seeing his eyes still held some doubt, her face morphed into a serious expression and she decided to say what had been on her mind recently. I have never been more certain about anything else in my life, she stated. When you freed me from the tree, and promised that you would never leave me, I was so happy, but yet at the same time I was confused by what my heart was feeling. It felt like it was going to burst from my chest in happiness. And when you fought Ares, the thought of you dying, it almost breaks my heart just thinking about it, she said, a sad look now adorning her face. It took me a while to understand what those feelings that I had were, but now that I have realized them, she paused, and took a deep breath, unsure about how she was going to say the next part. I want you to have my virginity. I want you to be the only one I ever give myself to. I want to bear your children someday. Because I love you, Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened when he heard her confession. She loved him. She wanted him to be the only one she would ever be with. His heart was bouncing around in his chest in pure happiness, and he realized just what his feelings for her were in that moment. Thalia was getting worried when Naruto didn't reply. She was scared that he might not reciprocate her feelings. Thalia. Naruto said, a blank look on his face. His look drew an even more worried look from Thalia, and a slight one from Helena, who was sitting close to them, somewhat eager to watch the upcoming fireworks, and somewhat tense about what Naruto would say. Naruto's face suddenly broke into a small, soft smile. I love you too, he said. His words brought immense relief to the two others, and Thalia's eyes began to water with happy tears. She kissed him with as much love and passion as she could muster. Naruto happily returned the kiss, and rolled them over so he was the one on top. He pulled back, drawing a disappointed groan from the girl under him, and lined himself up to her opening, but before he moved any further he had to be sure. Are you sure you really want this? He asked. I can He was silenced when Thalia pulled him down into a heated kiss. She pulled back and glared at him slightly. Naruto, I am absolutely sure about this, she said. Now shut up and take me, she ordered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Naruto sighed in acceptance, and slowly began to push his cock into her folds, never taking his eyes from Thalia's own. They both moaned when Thalia's neither lips opened, they moaned even louder when the whole head went in. He moved deeper and eventually felt Thalia's hymen blocking him. He looked to her for permission. Thalia nodded and braced herself. She knew the next part would hurt. Naruto pulled out until just the head was left and in one strong, fast thrust he had penetrated the hymen and buried himself completely inside Thalia's pussy. He almost came right then and there, she was so tight, and wet. Thalia cried out on pain as her virginity was ended, her nails dug into Naruto's back, and her legs wrapped around his waist to keep him from moving. Tears of pain rolled down her face, and blood leaked out of her pussy. Naruto felt extremely guilty for being the one to cause her such pain, and he leaned down to kiss her tears away, whispering sweet nothings in her ear as he did so. After a few minutes of not moving, Thalia looked up at him and nodded. "I'm fine now, you can move, Naruto," she said. Naruto nodded and ever so slowly began to move his hips. He pulled out a few inches before thrusting himself back in. They both groaned when he did so. The sensations that had shot through their bodies had been better than they could have imagined. Naruto began at a slow tempo. He wanted to savor the moment. But Thalia's walls were so tight, they were almost driving him insane. Thalia still felt some pain when Naruto moved, but that was quickly being drowned out by the immense pleasure she was feeling. All her nerves were being stimulated, her body felt like a live wire, and the fullness that she felt made her feel complete. Harder, Naruto-kun," she moaned, wanting more of the pleasure that Naruto was providing her. Naruto groaned and began to pick up the pace. The sound of flesh slapping against flesh filled the clearing. Naruto kissed Thalia as he continued to pound into her. One of the girls he loved was moaning into his mouth and was rubbing her tits into his chest. "Why Yuri so tight, Lia-chan?" Naruto moaned as he grabbed her hips and began to pull her into his thrusts. As he did this, Naruto looked down on Thalia to see her start to pinch her own nipples in moaning in pleasure. Her expression was that of total and utter sexual bliss. Just the sight of that made him almost climax. He didn't know it, but his animalistic instincts began to take over, and he became more feral looking. He didn't notice because the feeling that he got by making love to Thalia was enough to block anything else but the girl in question from his mind. Thalia couldn't believe the amount of pleasure she was feeling. It was pure euphoria. She looked up to her lover and saw, much to her shock, that Naruto was beginning to look more feral. His whiskers became darker, his pupils turned slit-like, and his canines lengthened. To Thalia, it added to the overall hotness of the scene, and she could feel her end getting close. "Faster, Naruto," she shouted. A low growl escaped Naruto's throat, his hips became a blur and the veins in his arms began to show as he literally pounded his crotch into her. Thalia began to scream out in pleasure as her orgasm hit her hard, and her body began to spasm uncontrollably. Naruto felt his own orgasm coming and he began to speed up his thrusts even more. Due to her orgasm, Thalia's walls had clamped down on him and they became searing hot. "Thalia-chan, I'm gonna dash." He was cut off when Thalia's legs tightened around his waist to stop him from pulling out, and she shouted through her sexual high, "Inside. Come inside me." What was left of Naruto's self-control slipped as she shouted those words. He pulled her into his thrusts as he again sped them up. His whole body was shaking from the effort to hold out as long as it could. Naruto let out a bestial roar as he slammed his cock into Thalia's pussy as deep as he could go and came, flooding her insides with his semen. Thalia's own orgasm was amplified when she felt Naruto's thick batter inside her, and her body once again started to shake out of control. So lost in their passion, neither noticed when they bit each other on the shoulder, each channeling a small amount of chakra through their teeth as they did so. Their pleasure spiked again when they bit each other, and they found themselves climaxing again. Naruto painting Thalia's insides white with the fresh load of semen, and Thalia drenching Naruto's cock with her juices, her pussy milking him for all he was worth. Naruto collapsed beside her, his features turning back to normal. They were both panting up a storm from their love-making. Thalia had a small happy smile on her face as she turned her head to look at the man beside her. She was about to say something when they heard a moan come from their left. They looked over and saw that Helena was there and she was coming on her fingers. They blushed when they realized that she had watched them, and was masturbating to the sight. Helena opened her eyes to see them looking at her with small blushes and smirked to herself. She began to crawl over to them slowly. Seeing her do this made Thalia blush more and Naruto to become hard again. "Oh, are you ready for more, Naruto-kun?" Helena asked seductively when she saw his member stiffen. All Naruto could do was stare as she made her way towards him. Helena smirked when he didn't answer. "I would hope so," she said, straddling him, "because we are far from done." She locked his lips with hers in a very passion-filled kiss. As she kissed him, Helena began to rub her pussy against the tip of Naruto's cock. They both moaned in anticipation when they felt pleasurable volts running through them. Naruto pulled back, just enough to look her in the eyes. He saw the emotions they held. They were the same as his, pure love and lust. He knew what she wanted, and he wanted it too. "But are you sure?" he asked softly. Helena nodded, to him, "Very," she said before raising herself up and slamming herself down on him. Helena cried out in pain when she felt him stretch her. She may have lost her hymen due to intensive training centuries ago, but that did not mean that she wasn't a virgin, or that it hurt any less when she allowed him to take it. She grasped onto Naruto so tightly that her nails painfully dug into his back and drew a small amount of blood. Tears rolled from her eyes, and she buried her head into Naruto's shoulder. Naruto could do nothing but hold her tight and try to soothe her pain. He gently kissed the top of her head and whispered sweet nothings in her ears. It took a few minutes before she began to slowly move her hips. Helena still felt some pain, but like it had with Thalia, it was quickly replaced by the pleasure of their joining. Naruto groaned in pleasure at what he was feeling. It was incredible. "S so tight, Lina-chan," he groaned, beginning to thrust his hips upwards to match her thrusts. Naruto," Helena moaned out, arching her back as she rode him. Naruto found himself staring at Helena's breasts. Every movement she would make they would bounce in place. His hands reached up and began to knead them. Helena's eyes widened and she gasped in pleasure. "Naruto," she moaned. Naruto smirked at her and switched their positions. Now he was the one on top. Helena let out a small leap of surprise, but that was soon turned into a pleasure-filled gasp as Naruto began to thrust into her with reckless abandon. "S so good," Helena moaned, raking her hands through Naruto's hair. Naruto's eyes were closed in pleasure as he continued to pound into the vixen beneath him. And it was due to that he didn't notice that his features were once again becoming feral. "You feel so good, Lina-heim," he moaned, his voice coming out deeper than it normally was. He latched his mouth onto her nipple and sucked hard on it, causing Helena to moan louder as more pleasure shot through her. Helena's eyes widened when she noticed how feral Naruto had become. He looked much like he did when he used her chakra, and the sight made her even hotter. There was a sudden rush of pleasure as Naruto rubbed her most sensitive spot, bringing her over the edge, and with a silent scream she came, her walls clamping down on Naruto and drenching his cock with her juices. As she came, her walls got tighter and tighter, making Naruto come close to his end. He was interrupted when her legs wrapped around his waist and she screamed, "Come inside me, Naruto." And like when Thalia had shouted them, those words caused Naruto's self-control slip. It was with another roar that he buried himself as deep as he could and unloaded his seed deep within her. They both yelled their releases out to the heavens before they both bit each other on the shoulder and channeled their chakra through their teeth. And like before, their pleasure spiked and they came again. Naruto flooding Helena's insides with the fresh load semen, and Helena drenching Naruto's cock and milking it for what it was worth. Naruto collapsed beside Helena, his features once again becoming normal. Both of them panting in exhaustion. Two pairs of arms wrapped around him. He looked down to see Thalia and Helena grinning up at him happily. Naruto smiled at his lovers as he wrapped his arms around them. "So does this mean what I think it does?" he asked jokingly, looking down at the two girls resting their heads on his chest. They nodded to him. "Yeah, it does," Helena said. "You are ours and we are yours." Thalia nodded in agreement. "But if any other girl wants to be with you, they'll have to convince us," she said. "Not that I mind sharing," she muttered, closing her eyes and snuggling into Naruto's chest. Naruto smiled and looked up at the dark sky of the mindscape. He wondered how he got this lucky. "I love you, Lina-heim," he said as his eyes began to drift closed. We love you too. They said back as one. And with that the three lovers surrendered themselves to blissful sleep, never noticing marks forming on their shoulders. Thanks for watching.